The scent of decay hung thick in the ruined pharmacy, a cloying perfume of mold, rust, and something older, something wet and wrong that had seeped into the very concrete. Leo huddled behind the shattered remnants of what had once been a prescription counter, his back pressed against cold tile. His stomach was a hollow, twisting knot, a constant companion for 3 days now. He could count every rib through the thin fabric of his scavenged jacket, feel the sharp angles of his own hips digging into the floor. Hunger had long ago graduated from discomfort to a living thing inside him, gnawing with teeth of its own. Dust motes danced in the thin slivers of gray light that pierced through boarded-up windows. The pharmacy was a tomb of civilization, shattered glass vials, overturned shelves spilling empty plastic bottles, the ghostly outline of a red cross on a fallen sign. He'd been picking through the ruins for hours, finding nothing but dust and the brittle skeletons of long-gone medicines. His fingers, trembling slightly, traced the edge of a cracked tile. He was trying to remember the last time he'd eaten something that wasn't boiled lichen or stringy rat meat. The memory was fuzzy, bleached by hunger and fear. He thought there might have been a can of beans, months ago. The taste of salt and tomato sauce surfaced for a second, then vanished, leaving only the metallic tang of his own desperation. A low growl cut through the silence. It wasn't the wind. It was too organic, too wet. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. He'd been too focused on the emptiness of the shelves, too loud in his despair. The growl came again, closer this time, from beyond the broken front entrance. It was joined by another, then a third, a chorus of hungry sounds. Flesh-hounds. He'd heard stories from other scavengers who'd barely escaped with their lives. They hunted in packs, drawn by movement and the scent of fear. Their bodies were patchworks of exposed muscle and wiry fur, mutations from the dimensional rifts that had twisted ordinary animals into relentless predators. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, Leo peered around the edge of the counter. 3 of them stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dull gray light of the ruined street outside. They were the size of large wolves, but wrong. Their skin was mottled, pulled taut over bunched muscle, with patches where the flesh seemed to have sloughed off entirely, revealing glistening tendons and bone. Saliva dripped from elongated jaws filled with needle-like teeth. Their eyes were milky white, blind but somehow fixed in his direction. They sniffed the air, heads tilting. One of them, larger than the others with a ragged scar across its muzzle, the alpha, took a step forward, its claws clicking on the broken linoleum. The sound was obscenely loud in the stillness. Leo's mind raced, a frantic scramble of half-formed plans. The back door. He'd checked it earlier, jammed shut, sealed by fallen debris. The windows were boarded. He was trapped. The alpha's head swung toward the counter, its nostrils flaring. It had his scent. With a snarl that ripped through the air, the alpha charged. Leo scrambled back, his hands slipping on dust. The beast was fast, unnaturally fast. It cleared the distance in 2 bounding leaps, crashing into the counter. Wood splintered. Leo rolled sideways as claws swiped where his head had been, tearing a chunk out of the tile wall. The other 2 hounds fanned out, moving to flank him, their growls vibrating in the cramped space. He stumbled to his feet, backing toward a collapsed shelving unit. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. There was no weapon. Nothing but rubble and ruin. The alpha advanced, shoulders hunched, drool pooling on the floor. Its milky eyes seemed to stare right through him, seeing only meat. Think. He had to think. But hunger and fear had turned his thoughts to sludge. The other hounds were closing in from the sides, cutting off any escape. The alpha lunged. Leo threw himself to the side again, but his emaciated body was slow, clumsy. A claw caught his shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin. White-hot pain lanced through him. He cried out, stumbling against a shelf. The alpha was on him in an instant, its weight driving him to the floor. The breath exploded from his lungs. He could feel the heat of its body, smell the rot on its breath. Its maw opened, teeth glistening, aimed at his throat. This was it. He was going to die here, in this tomb of a pharmacy, forgotten and starving. The thought was a cold stone in his gut. But beneath the terror, something else sparked, a raw, desperate fury. He hadn't survived this long, hadn't crawled through the ruins and watched the world die, just to end as food for some twisted beast. His hand scrabbled across the floor, fingers closing around something cold and metallic. A broken pipe, fallen from the ceiling. It was heavy, rusted, about 2 feet long. The alpha's jaws descended. With a scream that was more rage than fear, Leo drove the pipe upward. The jagged end punched into the flesh-hound's neck, just below the jaw. The beast shrieked, a high, piercing sound of agony and surprise. Black blood, thick and foul-smelling, gushed over Leo's hand, warm and sticky. The alpha thrashed, its weight crushing him, but its coordination was gone. Leo held on, driving the pipe deeper, twisting with all the strength his starving body could muster. The hound's struggles grew weaker, its snarls turning to wet gurgles. Finally, it went still, its body a dead weight atop him. Panting, soaked in blood and sweat, Leo shoved the carcass aside. The other two hounds hesitated, circling, confused by the sudden fall of their leader. But their hunger was undiminished. They'd move in soon. His eyes fell on the alpha's corpse. The pipe had torn a massive hole in its throat. And there, amidst the ruin of flesh and bone, something pulsed. A heart. Still beating, a slow, stubborn rhythm pushing black blood into the cavity. An idea, insane and primal, bloomed in his mind. He'd heard whispers in the ruins, mad tales from those touched by the rifts. Of changes. Of power taken from the monsters. He'd never believed them. But now, with death circling him, belief was a luxury he couldn't afford. He didn't let himself think. Thinking would mean considering the horror of it. He simply acted. Reaching into the still warm cavity, his fingers slippery with blood, he closed them around the heart. It was larger than a human's, tough and muscular. He tore it free with a wet, ripping sound. It throbbed in his hand, a final, defiant beat. The remaining hound snarled, inching closer. Leo brought the heart to his mouth. The coppery smell of blood filled his nostrils, mixed with something alien, something charged. He bit down. The taste was indescribable, not like meat, but like lightning and raw, unfiltered life. It was horrible. He gagged, his stomach revolting, but he forced himself to swallow. A chunk of dense muscle went down his throat. He took another bite, teeth tearing through fibrous tissue. Black blood coated his lips, his chin. He ate ravenously, driven by a need deeper than hunger, a need to not die. As he swallowed the last piece, a fire ignited in his gut. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a searing, overwhelming sensation of transformation. Heat radiated from his core, rushing down his right arm. He looked down, his breath catching. The skin of his forearm was darkening, turning a mottled gray-black. It bulged, muscles writhing and expanding beneath the surface as if something alive was reshaping them from within. Bones cracked and lengthened with sickening pops. His fingernails blackened, thickened, and curved into wicked, razor-sharp claws that gleamed dully in the dim light. The transformation took only seconds. Where his human arm had been was now a limb of monstrous power, thickly corded with savage muscle, ending in 4 brutal talons. He flexed the fingers. They responded with terrifying ease, stronger than anything he'd ever possessed. He could feel the raw strength coiled in the new muscles, a promise of violence. The 2 remaining flesh-hounds, sensing the change, attacked in unison. Leo moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. The new arm acted almost on its own. As the first hound leaped, he swung. The clawed hand connected with the beast's side. There was no resistance. The talons sheared through mutated flesh and bone as if it were paper. The hound was ripped apart mid-air, its body collapsing in 2 bloody pieces. The second hound skidded to a halt, a low whine escaping its throat. It turned to flee. Leo was on it in 2 strides. His new legs felt stronger too, fueled by the same alien energy. He grabbed the fleeing hound by the scruff of its neck. His claws sank deep. With a single, brutal wrench, he snapped its spine. The creature went limp. Silence returned to the pharmacy, broken only by Leo's ragged breathing and the drip of blood on the floor. He stood amidst the carnage, 3 dead flesh-hounds surrounding him. The adrenaline that had flooded his veins began to recede, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in its wake. He looked at his right arm. His arm. The clawed, monstrous limb. He turned it over, watching the way the dim light caught on the black talons. He could still feel the ghost of the pipe in his left hand, the strain in his human muscles. The contrast was absolute. He had survived. He had power. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He staggered, putting his left hand, his human hand, against the wall to steady himself. As the last of the battle high faded, his mind, starved and traumatized, finally had a moment to turn inward. He thought, instinctively, of comfort. Of a safe memory to anchor himself. His mother. She had sung to him when he was very small, when the world was still whole. A lullaby. He tried to picture her face. Nothing. A blank space. A void where a memory should have been. He concentrated, squeezing his eyes shut. He knew she had had dark hair. He knew her voice had been soft. But her features, the curve of her smile, the color of her eyes, the way she'd looked at him, it was gone. Wiped clean. As if it had never existed. A cold deeper than any he'd felt in the ruined city seeped into his bones. He opened his eyes and stared at the clawed hand, the instrument of his salvation. The price was written in the empty space in his mind. He had gained the strength of the beast. And in exchange, he had lost the first memory of love. He stood there for a long time, in the tomb of the pharmacy, not seeing the bodies or the ruin, seeing only the monstrous shape of his own hand and the terrifying silence where his past used to be. Leo stumbled away from the pharmacy, his right arm a grotesque, unfamiliar weight at his side. The clawed limb hung awkwardly, the muscles bulging with a strength that felt both alien and terrifyingly natural. He kept it tucked close to his body, trying to hide the mutation beneath the tattered remains of his scavenger's coat, but the fabric had torn during the transformation, leaving the monstrous appendage partially exposed. Ruined buildings loomed around him like skeletal giants, their broken windows staring with empty eyes. The air carried the familiar stench of decay and ozone, the ever-present signature of the dimensional rifts that had torn the world apart. Leo moved through the debris-strewn streets with a new wariness, his senses heightened by the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats, every distant sound a possible predator. Other scavengers moved through the ruins like ghosts, their gaunt faces hollowed by hunger and fear. As Leo passed a collapsed office building, a woman dragging a makeshift sled of salvaged electronics froze, her eyes widening as they fixed on his arm. She didn't speak, didn't scream, just stared with a mixture of horror and fascination before quickly looking away and hurrying in the opposite direction. Further down the street, a group of 3 men huddled around a small fire made from burning papers paused their conversation. One of them, a bearded man with a scar across his cheek, met Leo's gaze, then deliberately looked down at the mutated arm before turning back to his companions with a muttered warning. Leo could feel their eyes on his back long after he'd passed. The stares weren't just curiosity, they were the judgment of a world that had learned to fear anything different. In the bio-horror apocalypse, mutations usually meant you were turning into one of them, becoming part of the nightmare that had consumed civilization. Leo quickened his pace, his heart pounding not from exertion but from the sudden, chilling understanding of what he now represented to other survivors. He needed shelter, somewhere to hide and understand what had happened to him. The memory of his mother's face, or rather, the absence of that memory, gnawed at him with a psychic pain that felt more real than any physical wound. When he tried to picture her, all he got was a blank space where a person should be, accompanied by a hollow ache in his chest. He could remember facts: she had been a teacher, she had loved gardening, she had died when the first rifts opened. But her smile, the sound of her voice, the warmth of her embrace, all gone, consumed by the thing that now lived in his gut. Ahead, the entrance to a subway station yawned like a dark mouth, half buried under collapsed concrete and twisted rebar. The sign above it was shattered, but Leo recognized it as the Green Line Central Station, or what remained of it. He approached cautiously, his new claws flexing unconsciously. The station had been one of the early casualties when the dimensional rifts tore through the city's underground networks, creating labyrinthine tunnels that now served as nests for things best left unimagined. But today, the entrance appeared clear. Leo slipped through a gap in the debris, his enhanced strength making it easy to shift a fallen beam that would have taken 3 men to move. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the weak afternoon light within feet of the entrance. He paused, letting his eyes adjust. Normal human vision would have seen nothing but blackness, but something in his mutated biology was already changing that. Shapes began to resolve from the gloom, the curve of the tunnel walls, the scattered remains of turnstiles, the glitter of broken glass underfoot. He descended deeper, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, mineral smell of underground spaces mixed with the faint, sweet odor of decay. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into what had once been a platform. Collapsed ceiling tiles littered the ground, and a train car lay on its side like a dead metal beast, its windows shattered. But the space was defensible, with only 2 obvious entrances and plenty of cover. Leo sank against the cold tile wall, finally allowing himself to examine the arm properly. He held it up before his face, turning it slowly. The transformation was both beautiful and horrifying. The skin had taken on a leathery, grayish texture, shot through with dark veins that pulsed with a faint, internal light. The claws were black and curved, easily 6 inches long, ending in needle-sharp points. When he flexed his fingers, the muscles in his forearm bunched with terrifying power, the bones beneath visibly thicker than they should have been. He reached out with his left hand, still human, still familiar, and touched one of the claws. The tip was so sharp it drew blood from his finger with the barest pressure. A drop of crimson welled up, stark against his pale skin. He watched it for a moment, then wiped it on his pants. Nearby, a section of metal railing had torn loose from the platform edge. Leo stood, approached it, and with a casual swipe of his right arm, brought the claws down across the steel. The metal parted with a shriek of tearing metal, the cut edges glowing faintly red where the claws had passed through. He stared at the cleanly severed ends, then at his arm. No strain, no effort, just raw, effortless power. He repeated the motion on a chunk of concrete, reducing it to gravel with 3 quick strikes. On a discarded subway seat, the claws sliced through foam and fabric as if they weren't there. Each demonstration should have filled him with awe, with triumph at having gained such a weapon in a world where weapons meant survival. Instead, all he felt was that growing emptiness, that sense of something precious being carved away from the core of who he was. A skittering sound broke his concentration. Leo froze, his head snapping toward the darkness at the far end of the platform. The sound came again, a rapid, clicking movement across concrete, accompanied by wet, sniffing noises. His mutated arm tensed, the claws extending fully as some instinct he didn't understand prepared him for combat. From the shadows emerged a creature about the size of a large dog, but any resemblance to normal fauna ended there. It had the general shape of a rat, if rats had been redesigned by a mad god. Its body was hairless, the skin a mottled pink and gray that glistened with mucus. Instead of front paws, it had clusters of bony, finger-like appendages that tapped against the ground as it moved. The head was all wrong, too large for the body, with a mouth that split nearly ear to ear, revealing rows of needle teeth. But the eyes were the worst, 6 of them, arranged in 2 vertical rows on either side of its head, all milky white and blind-looking. Yet it moved with purpose, its head swinging back and forth as it sniffed the air. It had caught his scent. The rat creature let out a chittering hiss and charged, moving with surprising speed for something so malformed. Leo's body reacted before his mind could process the threat. He dropped into a crouch, his mutated arm coming up in a defensive position. As the creature leaped, jaws gaping, he swung. The claws met flesh with a wet, tearing sound. They sliced through the rat thing's shoulder, severing muscle and bone. The creature crashed to the ground beside him, twitching violently, a high-pitched squeal tearing from its throat. Dark blood, thick and foul-smelling, pooled on the concrete. Leo stood over it, breathing heavily even though the fight had lasted seconds. The creature's legs kicked weakly, then stilled. He watched it die, the milky eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The ease of the kill should have been satisfying. Instead, it just felt efficient. Like turning off a machine. Then the hunger hit. It wasn't the normal hunger of an empty stomach, this was something deeper, more primal. It started as a cramping in his gut, then spread through his body as a burning need. His eyes fixed on the dead creature, specifically on those milky white eyes. A voice in his head, not his own, but something ancient and ravenous, whispered that they held something he needed. No, he thought. I won't. Not again. But even as he formed the denial, he was already moving. His human hand reached out, trembling, and touched one of the eyes. It was cool and gelatinous under his fingers. The hunger intensified, becoming a pain that made him double over. Sweat broke out on his forehead. Just one, the voice whispered. Just to see what happens. His claws extended almost of their own accord. With a precise, surgical motion, he scooped out one of the creature's eyes. It came free with a soft pop, resting in his palm like a marble made of cloudy glass. He stared at it, revolted and fascinated in equal measure. Then he brought it to his mouth and swallowed. The eye slid down his throat with a sickening smoothness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then warmth spread through his body, starting in his stomach and radiating outward. It wasn't painful like the first transformation, this was subtler, almost gentle. He felt it most behind his own eyes, a pressure building then releasing. The world changed. Where before the darkness of the subway had been merely navigable, now it became as clear as daylight. No, clearer. Details leaped out at him, the individual grains in the concrete, the patterns of corrosion on metal surfaces, the faint trails of moisture on the walls. He could see the heat signatures of recent movement, the warm spot where the rat creature had died, the cooler path it had taken through the tunnel. Colors shifted into spectrums he hadn't known existed, ultraviolet patterns glowing on surfaces that should have been blank. He had night vision. Perfect, enhanced night vision. The wonder lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the emptiness returned, colder and deeper than before. This time, it wasn't a missing face. It was a sound. A specific, cherished sound that had lived in his memory since childhood. He grasped for it, desperately trying to hold on, but it slipped through his mental fingers like smoke. Jake's laughter. Jake had been his best friend since they were 6 years old. They'd built forts in backyards, traded comic books, promised to be each other's best man. When the rifts opened, Jake had died trying to save his little sister from a swarm of flying parasites. Leo had carried the memory of his laughter, loud, unself-conscious, always ready to find humor in the darkest situations, as a tiny piece of light in a dark world. Now it was gone. Not the fact of Jake, not the knowledge that he had existed. But the actual sound, the particular cadence and tone that made it uniquely Jake's. Leo could remember that Jake laughed often, that his laugh was infectious. But he couldn't hear it anymore. The memory had become a photograph with the audio track removed, a silent image of a smiling face. He sank to his knees beside the dead rat creature, his enhanced vision now showing him every disgusting detail of its corpse in crystalline clarity. The power was incredible. With this vision, he could navigate the darkest ruins, spot predators before they spotted him, find hidden caches of supplies. It was a survival advantage beyond anything most scavengers could dream of. And it had cost him Jake's laughter. A trade. Always a trade. The thing in his gut, this insatiable gut, didn't give gifts. It made exchanges. Power for pieces of his soul. What's next, he thought, staring at his mutated hand. What do I lose when I eat something else? My father's voice. The memory of my first kiss. The feeling of sunlight on my face. He stood up, his movements mechanical. He needed to survive. That was the only law left in this broken world. If these mutations helped him survive, then he would use them. But he would be careful. He would only eat when necessary. He would only take what he absolutely needed. Even as he made the resolution, he knew it was a lie. The hunger was still there, a low burn in his gut that whispered of other possibilities. What if he ate something with wings? What if he ate something with armored skin? What if he could become strong enough that nothing in this ruined city could touch him? The sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Not the skittering of more rat creatures. These were human footsteps, boots on concrete, moving with purpose. Multiple pairs. Leo's enhanced hearing, another unexpected benefit of his latest mutation, picked up the rustle of clothing, the quiet click of weapons being readied. He turned toward the tunnel entrance he'd come through, his night vision showing him the heat signatures of 5 people approaching. They moved in a tactical formation, covering each other, professionals in a world where most survivors had forgotten what professionalism looked like. The group emerged from the darkness into the platform area. They wore scavenged military gear mixed with homemade armor, their faces grim beneath helmets and scarves. The leader was a woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, her rifle held at the ready but not quite aimed, yet. The other 4 fanned out behind her, their weapons covering different angles of the space. For a long moment, no one spoke. The woman's eyes traveled from Leo's face to his mutated arm, to the dead rat creature at his feet, then back to his face. Her expression didn't change, but the tension in her shoulders increased slightly. Then she raised her rifle, the barrel centering on Leo's chest. Her voice, when it came, was flat and devoid of emotion, carrying the weight of someone who had made hard decisions and would make more without hesitation. What are you? The rifle barrel didn't waver. Leo stared down its dark tunnel, the woman's sharp eyes assessing him with the cold precision of a predator. Her 4 companions fanned out in the subway tunnel, their own weapons raised, 2 with makeshift spears tipped with rusted rebar, 1 with a crossbow whose string looked frayed, and the last with a pipe wrench that glinted dully in the faint light filtering through cracks above. What are you? The woman repeated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Leo slowly raised his human left hand, palm open. The clawed right arm hung at his side, the dark talons still slick with rat creature ichor. He could see their heat signatures pulsing, the woman's steady crimson glow, the 4 survivors' warmer orange-yellow patterns flickering with tension. The night vision made their faces appear ghostly pale, every detail of their worn clothing and makeshift armor starkly visible. "I'm just trying to survive," Leo said, keeping his voice low. "Like you." "That arm isn't human," one of the spearmen said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's one of them." "It's a mutation," Leo corrected quickly. The lie formed on his tongue before he could consider it. "Happened before the rifts. Some kind of genetic disorder." He forced himself to meet the woman's gaze. "I didn't ask for it." The woman's eyes narrowed. She was older than he'd first thought, maybe late 30s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. Scars crisscrossed her face, one cutting through her left eyebrow. Her clothing was practical, reinforced leather over faded military fatigues, every pocket bulging with scavenged supplies. "Name?" she demanded. "Leo. I'm Mara." She lowered the rifle a fraction. "You killed that thing alone." He nodded toward the rat creature's corpse. "It attacked me." One of the survivors, the crossbowman, edged forward to examine the body. "6 eyes," he muttered. "Never seen one like this. The mutations are getting weirder." Mara kept her eyes on Leo. "You have night vision too. I saw your pupils dilate when we stepped out of the shadows." Another lie, quick and desperate. "Part of the same condition. Enhanced senses." She studied him for a long moment, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the tunnel. Leo could feel the insatiable gut stirring, a faint, gnawing hunger at the sight of the dead creature. He pushed it down, focusing on keeping his breathing steady. "We have an enclave," Mara said finally. "Fortified position. We take in survivors who can contribute." Her eyes flicked to his clawed arm. "That looks like it could contribute. What's the catch?" Leo asked. "You follow my rules. You pull your weight. And if that arm ever turns on one of us..." She didn't finish the threat. She didn't need to. Leo considered his options. Alone in the ruins, he'd be constantly hunted, by monsters, by other scavengers, by his own growing hunger. The enclave offered shelter, maybe even safety. But it meant hiding what he was, what he could do. Every use of his powers risked exposure. Every mutation would cost him memories he couldn't afford to lose. "Okay," he said. "I'll follow your rules." Mara nodded and gestured with her rifle. "Then let's move. It's not safe after dark." The journey took 2 hours through ruined streets and collapsed buildings. Mara led with silent efficiency, her movements economical and precise. The 4 survivors, Leo learned their names were Tomas, spearman, Rick, crossbow, Lena, the other spearman, a woman with close-cropped hair, and Jax, pipe wrench, formed a protective diamond around him, their weapons never lowering completely. As they walked, Leo's enhanced vision picked up details the others missed, heat signatures of smaller creatures skittering in the rubble, the faint glow of residual radiation in certain areas Mara carefully avoided, the way certain buildings seemed to pulse with unnatural warmth. He said nothing, filing the information away. The enclave was a shopping mall, or what remained of one. 3 stories of concrete and glass, though most windows were boarded over or reinforced with scrap metal. A perimeter wall had been constructed from vehicles, rusted cars and trucks piled 3 high, their interiors filled with rubble and debris. Watchtowers made of scaffolding rose at each corner, manned by figures with rifles. "Home sweet home," Jax muttered as they approached the main gate. The gate was a reinforced school bus turned on its side, with a narrow passage cut through its middle. Guards recognized Mara and waved them through. As Leo stepped into the mall proper, he was struck by the contrast to the outside world. People. Dozens of them. Maybe 100. They moved through the cavernous space with purpose, carrying water buckets, tending small gardens under skylights, repairing weapons at workbenches. Children played in a cleared area under watchful eyes. The air smelled of wood smoke, boiled grains, and unwashed humanity. But beneath those normal scents, Leo's enhanced senses detected others: fear, sweat, infection, the metallic tang of blood from recent injuries. And something else, a faint, sweet rot that reminded him of the flesh-hounds. "We have rules," Mara said as she led him through the central concourse. "Food is rationed. Everyone works. Disputes go to me or my lieutenants. Weapons are checked at the armory unless you're on guard duty." She stopped and turned to face him. "Your arm stays covered when you're not using it. We have children here." They don't need nightmares. Leo nodded. Understood. You'll bunk with the single men. Tomas will show you. She started to walk away, then paused. And Leo? That story about it being a pre-existing condition? I don't believe you. But as long as you're useful and you don't endanger my people, I don't care where it came from. She disappeared into the crowd before he could respond. Tomas led him to what had once been a sporting goods store. The racks were empty, the floor covered with bedrolls and makeshift cots. About 20 men slept or talked in small groups. They fell silent as Leo entered, eyes widening at his clawed arm. New recruit, Tomas announced. Name's Leo. He's got special abilities. One of the men, older with a beard streaked with white, stood up. Another mutant. Like Kale. Different, Tomas said quickly. Leo's on our side. The older man grunted. For now. Tomas showed Leo to an empty corner. You can set up here. Latrines are in the old bathrooms, west end of the mall. Mess hall's the food court. Dinner's at sunset. He hesitated. Look, about the arm, people are scared. The mutation's out there, they're changing faster. Last week, something got through the perimeter that had 3 mouths and kept screaming in human voices. So just, be careful, okay? Leo nodded his thanks. As Tomas left, he sat on the bedroll and examined his clawed hand. The transformation was complete, the arm was thicker than his left, corded with muscle that shouldn't exist, ending in 5 black talons that could shred steel. He flexed them, watching the way the light caught their razor edges. He tried to remember his sister's face. Nothing. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He could picture her in abstract terms, brown hair, maybe. Freckles. But the specific details, the way she smiled when she was teasing him, the sound of her voice when she sang off-key in the shower, gone. Eaten by the power in his arm. Hey. Leo looked up. A young man with a bandaged arm stood nearby, holding out a canteen. Water's rationed too, but first-timers get a full one. Name's Eli. Leo. He took the canteen. Thanks. Eli sat on the floor nearby. Heard you took down one of the 6 eyes alone. Those things are nasty. Their bites get infected fast. He gestured to his bandage. Got lucky with this one. Mara's got some antibiotics left. How long have you been here? Leo asked. 3 months. Came with my brother. He didn't make it. Eli's expression darkened. Scavenging run went bad. Something new came through the rift, looked like a giant centipede but with human hands instead of legs. It. He shook his head. Anyway. Mara keeps us alive. She's tough, but fair. Leo took a sip of water. What about other mutants? The older man mentioned someone named Kale. Eli's expression closed off. Kale was different. His mutations changed him. Not just his body. His mind. He started seeing things, hearing voices. One night he just walked out into the ruins. Never came back. He stood up. Dinner soon. The stew's mostly roots and whatever protein they can scavenge, but it's hot. After Eli left, Leo lay back on the bedroll. The ceiling was stained with water damage, patterns spreading like dark continents on a map. He could hear the enclave around him, the murmur of voices, the clang of metal from the workshop, children laughing somewhere distant. Normal sounds. Human sounds. For the first time since the pharmacy, he felt something like safety. And that terrified him more than the flesh-hounds ever had. The alarm sounded just as the sun dipped below the ruined skyline. It was a harsh, clanging bell, someone beating on a metal pipe with a wrench. Leo was in the food court, holding a bowl of thin stew, when the sound echoed through the mall. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. People dropped what they were doing. Parents gathered children. The able-bodied grabbed weapons from racks along the walls. Mara appeared on the second-floor balcony overlooking the concourse. Perimeter breach. West wall. All combat capable to positions. Her voice carried without shouting, calm and commanding. Leo set down his bowl and followed the flow of people toward the west entrance. Through the reinforced glass doors, he could see movement in the gathering dusk. Not the lumbering forms of flesh-hounds or the skittering of rat creatures, but something else, smaller, faster, countless. What are they? he asked Tomas, who was fitting a metal plate to his forearm as a shield. Swarmas, Tomas said grimly. Insectoid things. Size of dogs, but they move in packs of 20 or more. Their mandibles can cut through leather. And they're smart, they look for weak points. Outside, the first wave hit the perimeter. Leo's night vision activated automatically, painting the scene in shades of green and heat signatures. The swarmas were indeed insect-like, 6 legs, segmented bodies, compound eyes that glowed with internal heat. But their heads were wrong, too large, with mandibles that clicked together with a sound like breaking bones. They flowed over the vehicle wall like living water, finding gaps between cars, climbing over each other to reach the top. Guards in the watchtowers fired down, but there were too many. "They're through," someone shouted. A section of the wall collapsed as swarmas dug at the rubble-filled vehicles, creating a breach. Dozens poured through, skittering across the parking lot toward the mall entrance. Mara was already directing defenders. Spears to the front. Archers behind. Don't let them surround you. She saw Leo. You. Can that arm kill? Yes. Then prove it. The doors burst open as defenders reinforced them from inside. Swarmas squeezed through gaps, their clicking mandibles filling the air. The first one lunged at a woman with a spear, Lena from the subway. She thrust, impaling it, but 2 more came at her flanks. Leo moved without thinking. His clawed arm swept out, catching the first swarmer mid-leap. The talons sheared through its chitinous shell-like paper, spilling hot ichor across the floor. He pivoted, his enhanced vision tracking the second creature's heat signature as it tried to circle behind Lena. A backhand blow crushed its head against the wall. More were coming through. Leo positioned himself at the breach, his claws becoming a blur of motion. He didn't need to think about technique, the arm knew what to do. It was stronger, faster than anything human. He tore through swarmer after swarmer, their bodies piling up at his feet. But there were too many. They were coming from multiple directions now, some climbing the exterior walls toward upper windows. Leo saw one group heading for a side entrance where children were being evacuated. Mara. Left flank, he shouted. She was already there, her rifle firing precise shots that took swarmas off the walls. But her ammunition was limited. We need to collapse the main breach, she called back. Leo fought his way toward the doors. Swarmer mandibles scraped against the chitinous plates that had begun forming on his torso, another mutation he hadn't noticed progressing. The plates held, deflecting blows that would have gutted a normal human. At the entrance, he saw the problem. The swarmas had undermined a section of the vehicle wall, creating a tunnel. They were pouring through it in a continuous stream. We need to block it. Tomas yelled, trying to shove a metal cabinet into the gap. A swarmer clamped onto his leg. Tomas screamed as mandibles sawed through his leather greaves. Leo grabbed the creature and ripped it away, tossing it back through the breach. His claws dug into the side of a rusted van that formed part of the wall. With a grunt of effort, he pulled. Metal screeched in protest, but the van shifted, tilting to block the tunnel. Now, he shouted. Survivors rushed forward, piling debris, broken furniture, concrete chunks, anything heavy, behind the van. The stream of swarmas slowed to a trickle, then stopped as the breach sealed. The remaining creatures inside the perimeter were quickly dispatched. Leo stood panting in the sudden quiet, his clawed arm dripping with ichor. Around him, survivors stared, some in awe, some in fear. Mara approached, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked at the pile of swarmer corpses around Leo, then at his arm. You saved at least 10 lives tonight. Leo nodded, suddenly aware of the hunger. The insatiable gut was awake now, screaming at him to feast on the dead creatures, to take their traits, to grow stronger. He clenched his human hand until the nails bit into his palm, using the pain to focus. Can you keep doing that? Mara asked quietly. As long as you need me to. She studied him for a long moment. Then you have a place here. Food, shelter, protection. In exchange, you help defend us. She gestured to the enclave around them. These people are all that's left of this city. Maybe all that's left, period. We keep each other human. The word hung in the air between them. Human. Leo looked at his clawed hand, at the chitinous plates forming on his chest. How much of that was left in him? And how much more would he lose? Thank you, he said. That night, Leo dreamed. He was back in the pharmacy, but different. The flesh-hound's heart pulsed in his hand, warm and vital. He brought it to his mouth, but instead of eating it, the heart melted into his skin, becoming part of him. His arm grew thicker, heavier. Bony spikes erupted from his forearm, curving like talons. He looked down and saw his reflection in broken glass, a monster with too many eyes, too many limbs, a thing of claws and hunger. He woke with a gasp. The enclave was quiet, most survivors asleep. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, painting silver stripes across the floor. Leo sat up, his heart pounding. Something was wrong with his arm. He held it up to the light. The clawed hand was the same, but the forearm, it had thickened since the battle. Not much, but enough to notice. And along the outer edge, just below the elbow, 3 small bony protrusions had emerged, sharp, chitinous spikes about an inch long. He touched one with his human hand. It was hard, unyielding, growing directly from his bone. A passive mutation. Progressing without him eating anything. The insatiable gut wasn't just about consumption. It was changing him, evolving him, even when he resisted. And each change cost memories. He tried to remember his mother's voice singing lullabies, something he'd clung to after the first mutation. Silence. Gone. Leo sat in the dark, watching the moonlight trace the new spikes on his arm. Outside, the ruins stretched for miles, filled with monsters he could consume to grow stronger. Inside the mall, people slept, trusting him to protect them. And within him, something hungry and inhuman stirred, waiting for its next meal. The morning air in the mall enclave tasted of rust and damp concrete. Leo stood by the reinforced main doors, his clawed hand flexing unconsciously. The 3 bony spikes that had emerged overnight along his forearm felt foreign yet familiar, like teeth growing in wrong. He kept the arm tucked under a scavenged leather jacket, but the weight of it pulled at his shoulder, a constant reminder of what he was becoming. Mara approached with 4 survivors in tow, Tomas with his makeshift spear, Rick carrying a heavy pack, Lena checking her crossbow bolts, and Jax nervously adjusting his scavenged riot helmet. They were the same group that had escorted him here, their faces now familiar but their names sometimes slipping from his memory like water through fingers. Medical supplies, Mara said without preamble, her sharp eyes scanning Leo's concealed arm. The Old Mercy Hospital, 3 blocks east. We've lost too many to infection lately. Leo nodded, the movement feeling mechanical. He remembered infections, the feverish heat of them, the way skin turned angry red, but couldn't recall who exactly had died from them. The faces blurred together, another piece of his past sanded away by the thing growing inside him. The journey through the ruined streets was a silent procession of shadows. Leo walked point, his enhanced night vision unnecessary in the gray daylight but his heat vision active, painting the world in gradients of orange and red. He saw the residual warmth of recent monster passages, streaks of fading color on cracked asphalt, and the cold spots where nothing living had been for days. Tomas moved up beside him. Heard you took down that insect swarm yesterday. Impressive. Necessary, Leo said, the word coming out flatter than he intended. He tried to remember what gratitude felt like, but the emotion was distant, like hearing music through thick walls. The hospital loomed ahead, its upper floors collapsed inward like a broken ribcage. The main entrance was choked with debris, but Rick pointed to a service ramp leading to the basement loading docks. Supplies should be in the lower levels. Less picked over. They descended into darkness, and Leo's world shifted to monochrome greens and thermal signatures. The air grew thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something sweet and rotting. His insatiable gut stirred, a hollow ache that had nothing to do with hunger for food. The loading dock was a cavernous space filled with overturned gurneys and scattered medical equipment. Crates lined the far wall, some still sealed with faded hospital logos. Lena moved toward them, her crossbow raised. Looks clear, she whispered. That's when the first tentacle struck. It came from the ceiling shadows, a thick, rubbery appendage that wrapped around Jax's torso before he could scream. The survivor was yanked upward, his riot helmet clattering to the floor as he disappeared into the darkness above the storage racks. Graspers! Mara shouted, firing her rifle into the shadows. The muzzle flash illuminated more tentacles descending like pale snakes. Leo moved without thought. His clawed arm tore free of the jacket, the 3 bony spikes gleaming in the sporadic gunfire. He leapt, his enhanced muscles propelling him onto a storage rack, then upward toward the ceiling. Heat vision showed him the monster, a central mass clinging to the concrete above, surrounded by a dozen writhing tentacles, one of which held Jax in a crushing grip. The grasper's main body was a bulbous sack of pale flesh, its surface studded with nerve clusters that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. No eyes, no mouth, just pure predatory instinct. Jax struggled in its grip, his face turning purple as the tentacle constricted. Leo landed on a pipe running along the ceiling, his claws digging into metal for purchase. Below, Mara and the others fought the descending tentacles. Tomas speared one, black ichor spraying as it recoiled. Rick swung a crowbar, severing another with a wet crunch. But Leo's focus was on the central mass. He swung from the pipe, his body moving with an alien grace that felt both his and not his. The grasper sensed him, sending two tentacles whipping toward him. He severed the first with a swipe of his claws, the second wrapping around his waist. The pressure was immense, ribs creaking, breath forced from his lungs. But his chitinous armor plates held, the biological armor absorbing the crushing force. With his free hand, he tore at the tentacle, his claws sinking deep into rubbery flesh. The grasper shuddered, its nerve clusters flashing brighter. It was trying to pull him into its central mass, where digestive enzymes would reduce him to slurry. Leo felt a rage building, not human anger, but something colder, more primal. This thing was food. It was in his way. He ripped through the tentacle, black fluid spraying across his face. The taste was bitter and electric on his lips. He dropped, landing on the grasper's main body, his claws digging deep. The creature convulsed, all its tentacles retracting toward its core in a defensive spasm. Jax fell, landing hard on a pile of discarded linens. He gasped, clutching his bruised ribs, but alive. Leo didn't notice. His world had narrowed to the pulsing nerve clusters before him. His insatiable gut screamed with need. Without conscious thought, he tore one free, a gelatinous mass the size of his fist, threaded with faintly glowing fibers. He brought it to his mouth. The taste was indescribable, like lightning and seawater and something that had never been meant for human consumption. He swallowed, and the transformation began immediately. Pain erupted along his spine, sharp and burning. He felt something tearing through his skin, emerging from between his shoulder blades. Four prehensile tendrils, each as thick as his thumb and twice as long as his arm, writhed into existence. They moved with a mind of their own at first, lashing at the air before stilling, awaiting his command. The grasper, mortally wounded, went limp. Its remaining tentacles drooped, then fell still. Leo dropped to the floor, the new tendrils retracting against his back. He quickly pulled his jacket back on, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the appendages hidden beneath the leather. They curled against his skin, warm and alive. What the hell was that? Tomas breathed, staring at the dead grasper. Mara was helping Jax to his feet, but her eyes were on Leo. She'd seen the tendrils. He could tell by the way her gaze lingered on his back, by the tightening around her mouth. "We got what we came for," Rick said, already loading sealed medical crates into packs. "Let's move before more show up." The return journey was tense and silent. Leo walked at the rear, constantly aware of the new limbs on his back. They twitched occasionally, responding to his stray thoughts. When a rat skittered through rubble to their left, one tendril instinctively lashed out toward the sound before he reined it in. He tried to remember something, anything, to ground himself. Food. He should remember food. Before the apocalypse, there had been foods he loved. A specific taste, a particular meal. Nothing. The memory was simply gone. Not faded, not distant, erased. He couldn't recall the taste of pizza, or chocolate, or his mother's cooking. He knew conceptually what those things were, but the sensory memory, the emotional weight of them, had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. The hollow place inside him grew larger. Back at the mall enclave, as the others distributed the medical supplies, Mara caught his arm. "My quarters. Now." Her room was a former office, its windows boarded over, lit by a single battery-powered lantern. Maps covered one wall, marked with safe routes and monster sightings. Mara closed the door behind them, the click of the latch sounding final. "Show me," she said. Leo hesitated, then shrugged off his jacket. The tendrils unfurled, stretching in the dim light. They were pale gray, tipped with subtle barbs, moving with eerie grace as they explored the air around him. Mara didn't flinch. She studied them with a clinical detachment that was somehow more frightening than horror would have been. "How many memories?" Leo's voice was flat. "I don't know. I've stopped counting. Not memories. Mutations. She stepped closer, her eyes tracing the lines where the tendrils emerged from his skin. The arm first. Then the night vision. The armor plates. Now these. You knew. I've seen it before. Mara's expression was grim. Not exactly like this, but similar. People who gain powers from consuming the rift spawn. It always costs something. Who else? Dead, she said simply. Or worse than dead. There was a man who could phase through walls. He forgot how to be solid. Last I saw him, he was stuck halfway through a concrete slab, screaming until his voice gave out. Leo's tendrils retracted slightly, curling protectively around his torso. Why tell me this? Because you're useful, Mara said, her honesty brutal. You saved Jax today. You saved half the enclave yesterday. But I've watched you these past days. You're forgetting how to be human. I'm still here. Are you? She met his eyes, and for the first time, Leo saw something like pity in her gaze. When you fought today, there was no fear in you. No hesitation. Just, hunger. That thing inside you is eating more than just monster parts, Leo. It's eating you. He wanted to argue, to tell her he was still in control. But the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. When he'd torn into the grasper, when he'd consumed its nerve cluster, there had been no thought of Jax, no concern for the other survivors. Just the need, the all-consuming need to feed the emptiness. What happens when you forget why you're fighting? Mara asked softly. What happens when you forget the difference between us and them? Outside, someone laughed, a human sound, warm and alive. Leo realized with a cold certainty that he couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. Not just hadn't laughed, but couldn't remember the feeling of it, the physical sensation of joy expressing itself through his body. You're on a dangerous path, Mara said, turning to study her maps. One that doesn't end with you as a hero. It ends with you becoming just another monster we have to put down. She didn't look at him as she spoke the next words. Get out. And keep those things hidden. If the others see. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Leo pulled his jacket back on, the tendrils folding awkwardly beneath the leather. As he left her quarters, he passed Eli in the hallway. The survivor nodded to him, a gesture of camaraderie. Heard you saved Jax's ass today, Eli said with a grin. Thanks, man. Leo nodded back, the movement automatic. He tried to summon some feeling, pride, satisfaction, connection, but there was only the hollow ache, and the new weight on his back, and the growing certainty that Mara was right. The path he was on had only one destination, and with every step, he forgot more of what it meant to be human. The first scream came from the west barricade just before dawn. Leo was already awake, sitting on a makeshift cot in the storage room Mara had assigned him. His clawed hand, now thicker, the 3 bony spikes protruding like ivory daggers, rested on his knee. Through the reinforced glass of the mall's upper windows, the gray light of morning was just beginning to bleed across the sky. He didn't need the light. His enhanced night vision painted the room in shades of green and black, and when he focused, he could see the faint heat signatures of sleeping survivors through the walls, their bodies glowing like embers in the dark. Another scream, closer this time. Then the sound of gunfire, rapid, panicked bursts that echoed through the hollow spaces of the mall. Leo was on his feet before the third scream finished. The 4 prehensile tendrils on his back twitched beneath his jacket, sensing the vibration in the air. He didn't bother with the door. His clawed hand tore through the drywall beside it, sending plaster dust billowing into the corridor. He emerged into the main concourse just as the first of the spine crawlers breached the main gate. It was a nightmare given form. 12 feet long from its segmented head to the barbed tip of its tail, the creature moved on 6 jointed legs that ended in hooked claws. Its back was a fortress of overlapping armor plates, each one the color of dried blood and etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the low light. But it was the spine that gave it its name, a ridge of bony protrusions running the length of its body, each one sharp enough to pierce concrete. Its mouth was a circular maw lined with rotating teeth, and when it opened, a sound like grinding stones filled the air. More were coming. Leo counted 3, then 5, then lost count as they poured through the shattered remains of the gate. The mall's defenses, sandbag barricades, welded sheet metal, tripwires rigged with explosives, crumbled like paper. A survivor named Eli was too slow to retreat. One of the crawlers lunged, its spine ridge catching him in the chest. The bony spike punched through his body armor and out his back in a spray of red. Eli didn't even have time to scream before the creature shook him loose like a rag doll. Fall back. Mara's voice cut through the chaos. She stood on the second-floor balcony, rifle raised. Tomas, Rick, Lena, and Jax were already forming a defensive line at the base of the escalators, their weapons barking fire. To the east exit. Now. Leo didn't retreat. Something primal stirred in his gut, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. His insatiable gut recognized the creatures, recognized the power in their armored hides, and it wanted. He could feel it coiling inside him, a separate entity that watched the carnage with cold, calculating interest. He moved. His clawed arm swept out, catching a spine crawler that had gotten too close. The 3 bony spikes on his forearm dug deep into the creature's side, tearing through chitin and muscle. Black fluid sprayed, sizzling where it hit the floor. The crawler thrashed, its tail whipping around to strike him. Leo didn't dodge. He let it hit him, the impact jarring through the chitinous plates that covered his torso. The armor held, but the force still drove the air from his lungs. Around him, the enclave was dissolving into panic. Survivors scrambled for the east exit, tripping over debris, abandoning weapons, helping the wounded. A mother dragged her child through the wreckage of a food court kiosk. An older man with a bandaged leg tried to stand, failed, and was trampled by the crowd. Leo saw it all through the detached lens of his heat vision, blobs of orange and yellow fleeing, cooling as they died. He fought his way toward Mara. The tendrils on his back lashed out without conscious thought, wrapping around a crawler's leg and yanking it off balance. He drove his clawed hand into its underbelly, where the armor was thinner, and ripped upward. Organs spilled onto the tile floor, steaming in the cold air. The creature shuddered and went still. Leo! Mara shouted from the balcony. She was firing methodically, each shot aimed at the crawler's eye clusters. We can't hold them. The east exit is blocked, they've flanked us. He looked. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see more spine crawlers emerging from the service corridors, cutting off the retreat. The survivors were trapped, pressed into a shrinking pocket near the central fountain. The water was red now. A new sound rose above the gunfire, a deep, resonant clicking, like stones being struck together. One of the larger crawlers, its armor darker, its spine ridge thicker, had fixed its attention on Leo. It moved with purpose, ignoring the other survivors, its circular maw opening and closing in anticipation. Leo met its charge. He ducked under a swipe of its tail, his tendrils coiling around a support pillar to pull him out of range. His clawed hand scored a deep groove along its side, but the armor was too thick. The creature spun, faster than he expected, and its spine ridge caught him in the side. Pain exploded through his body. The bony spike punched through his chitinous plates like they were nothing, driving deep into his flesh just below his ribs. Leo gasped, the world swimming in and out of focus. He could feel the spike grinding against bone, could feel the warm rush of blood soaking his shirt. The crawler lifted him, impaled on its spine, and shook him like a trophy. Through the haze of agony, he saw Mara's face, pale, desperate. He saw Tomas trying to drag a wounded Rick to cover. He saw them all burning, the fire spreading from a ruptured fuel canister. And he felt the hunger in his gut awaken fully, a ravenous void that demanded to be filled. With his last strength, Leo wrapped his clawed hand around the spike that impaled him. He didn't try to pull it out. Instead, he dug his claws into the crawler's armored carapace, right where the spike emerged from its body. He pulled, muscles straining, tendons screaming. The armor resisted, then cracked with a sound like breaking ice. A piece of it, jagged, the size of his palm, came free in his hand. He didn't think. He brought it to his mouth and bit down. The taste was foul, metallic, bitter, like chewing on rust and rot. But as soon as the first fragment touched his tongue, his insatiable gut activated. Heat bloomed in his stomach, spreading outward in waves. The pain from his wound receded, replaced by a crawling, itching sensation as his body remade itself. The chitinous plates on his torso thickened, new layers growing over the puncture, sealing the wound. He could feel them hardening, interlocking like puzzle pieces, until the bleeding stopped entirely. But the cost came immediately. A memory surfaced, vivid and bright, then dissolved like smoke in wind. He was 7 years old, standing in a sun-drenched driveway. His younger sister, her name was perched on a bicycle with training wheels, her small hands gripping the handlebars too tightly. He was holding the seat, steadying her. "I won't let go," he promised. Her laughter, high and clear, filled the air. Faster, Leo, she shouted. He pushed, and she pedaled, wobbling but upright. The feeling of pride that swelled in his chest, warm, human, uncomplicated, was the last thing he remembered before it was gone. Erased. Consumed. The spine crawler threw him off its spike. Leo hit the ground rolling, the new armor on his torso absorbing the impact. He came up on his feet, his body whole, his mind, emptier. The memory of his sister was gone. Not just faded, but erased, as if it had never existed. All that remained was a hollow space where something precious had been. He didn't grieve. He didn't have time. The larger crawler was turning for another attack, its maw gaping. Leo's tendrils shot out, wrapping around its legs. He pulled, using the creature's own momentum against it. It stumbled, crashing into a display case. Glass shattered. Leo was on it before it could rise, his clawed hand driving into the soft tissue of its throat. He tore, and black blood fountained. To the back, he shouted, his voice rough. There's a service tunnel behind the loading docks. He didn't know how he knew, some scrap of information from a scavenger's map, maybe, or a memory not yet eaten. It didn't matter. Mara heard him. She rallied the survivors, her voice cutting through the panic. With Leo. Now. They moved as a ragged unit, fighting their way through the last of the crawlers. Leo led, his new armor deflecting blows that would have killed a normal man. His tendrils cleared debris, his clawed hand broke through barricades. He didn't look back to see who followed. He didn't count the living or the dead. He simply moved, a machine of survival, carving a path through the burning mall. The service tunnel was cramped, dark, reeking of mildew and decay. But it was clear. One by one, the survivors stumbled into it, Mara, Tomas supporting Rick, Lena dragging Jax, others whose names Leo didn't remember. The last of them scrambled through just as the ceiling of the concourse collapsed in a roar of flame and falling concrete. They ran until the tunnel opened into a drainage culvert outside. Dawn had fully broken, the sky a sickly orange from the fires behind them. The survivors collapsed on the wet ground, gasping, weeping, tending wounds. Leo stood at the mouth of the tunnel, looking back at them all. Flames engulfed the structure, painting the morning sky in shades of red and gold. Black smoke billowed into the air, carrying with it the last remnants of the enclave, the hope, the community, the fragile sense of safety they had built. He watched it burn, waiting for the grief to come. Waiting for the anger, the loss, the human sorrow that should have clawed at his chest. Nothing came. He felt only cold calculation. The enclave was gone. Resources were lost. Survivors were reduced. New shelter would need to be found. The spine crawler's armor had proven useful, perhaps he could harvest more. The thoughts were clear, logical, devoid of emotion. The memory of teaching his sister to ride a bike was gone, and with it, the capacity to mourn what had been lost. He was still standing, still breathing, still powerful. That was all that mattered. Mara approached him, her face smudged with soot, her eyes hollow. We lost 23 people, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Eli. Karen. The children from the North Wing. Leo turned to look at her. His expression was blank, his eyes reflecting the fire but holding none of its heat. We need to move, he said. The smoke will draw more of them. She stared at him, searching for something in his face, some flicker of shared horror, some recognition of the tragedy they had just survived. She found nothing. Only the perfect, unfeeling monster he was becoming. Behind them, the mall burned, and Leo felt nothing at all. The cold seeped through Leo's chitinous plates like a persistent ghost. He sat apart from the others, his back against the rusted skeleton of an old delivery truck. 4 survivors huddled around a meager fire, Mara, Tomas, Rick, and Lena. Jax was tending to a shallow gash on his leg a few feet away, his movements stiff. The mall's collapse had left them with little, some scavenged rations, basic medical supplies, and the clothes on their backs. Leo's mutated arm rested across his knees. In the firelight, the 3 bony spikes that had emerged from the thickened flesh glinted like polished ivory. He flexed his fingers, watching the claws extend and retract with a soft, wet sound. Beneath his tattered jacket, the 4 prehensile tendrils from his back shifted restlessly, coiled tight against his spine. He could feel them like extra limbs waiting to be used. He tried to remember his sister's face. The memory was a hole in his mind. He knew he had a sister, the knowledge was there, a factual imprint, but her features were blurred, her voice silent. He could recall teaching her something. What was it? The memory slipped away like water through fingers. Her name hovered just beyond reach, a whisper in a storm. Leo clenched his jaw, the chitinous plates on his torso creaking faintly. The cold calculation that had settled in him after the mall's fall didn't care about names. It cared about survival. Mara watched him from across the fire. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. She'd seen the subtle bulge of the tendrils under his jacket, the way his armor plates didn't quite move like human skin. She said nothing, but her silence was heavier than words. "We need food," Tomas said, his voice rough. He was a lean man with haunted eyes, one of Mara's original four. "The rations won't last another day." Rick nodded, rubbing his arms against the chill. "The outskirts are crawling with things. We saw tracks earlier, something with a segmented tail." Leo stood. The movement was fluid, unnaturally quiet. "I'll hunt." The others looked at him. In the flickering light, his mutations were stark, the clawed arm, the armored torso that rose and fell with his breathing, the way his eyes caught the fire and reflected it back with a faint, predatory glow. Lena looked away first, her hands trembling as she adjusted a bandage on her wrist. "You shouldn't go alone," Mara said, but her tone lacked conviction. She knew what he was becoming. "I'm faster alone," Leo said. His voice was flat, stripped of warmth. "I can see in the dark." He didn't wait for permission. He turned and melted into the ruins beyond the firelight, his enhanced night vision painting the world in shades of gray and green. The heat signatures of small rodents glowed like embers in the rubble. He ignored them. His insatiable gut whispered for something more. The outskirts were a graveyard of the old world. Collapsed buildings formed jagged silhouettes against the starless sky. Twisted rebar clawed at the air like skeletal fingers. Leo moved through the wreckage with a hunter's grace, his claws finding perches on broken concrete, his tendrils occasionally unfurling to test the air or steady his balance. He could smell decay, rust, and beneath it all, the sharp, acrid scent of something venomous. He found the tracks near a collapsed parking garage. They were deep, three-toed, with a drag mark between them, a tail. The creature was large, maybe the size of a bear. Leo followed the trail, his heat vision picking up residual warmth in the prints. They led him to the mouth of a drainage tunnel, half blocked by debris. A low, chittering sound echoed from within. Leo crouched, his tendrils extending fully now, waving gently like sea anemones. They tasted the air, picking up chemical traces, musk, enzymes, poison. His heart beat a steady, cold rhythm. This was what he was made for. He slipped into the tunnel. The darkness was absolute, but to Leo, it was merely dim. His night vision rendered the tunnel in crisp detail, damp walls streaked with algae, broken pipes, the skittering of insects that glowed like tiny coals. The chittering grew louder. He rounded a bend and saw it. The stinger beast was coiled in a chamber where the tunnel widened. It was a grotesque fusion of arthropod and reptile, a segmented body covered in iridescent scales, 6 multi-jointed legs ending in hooked claws, and a tail that arched over its back, tipped with a bulbous, pulsating sac. Venom dripped from the stinger, sizzling where it hit the concrete. Its head was all mandibles and compound eyes that reflected Leo's heat signature back at him. It sensed him immediately. The tail whipped forward, the stinger shooting toward his face. Leo moved. His clawed arm snapped up, deflecting the stinger with a spray of sparks as it glanced off his chitinous plates. The impact jarred him, but he didn't feel pain, just pressure, data. His tendrils lashed out, wrapping around the creature's tail and yanking it off balance. The stinger beast screeched, a sound like grinding metal, and lunged. They met in a clash of claws and scales. Leo's mutated arm tore into the creature's side, ripping through iridescent plating. Ichor sprayed, burning where it touched his skin. The beast thrashed, its mandibles snapping at his throat. Leo ducked, his tendrils pulling him sideways, and drove his claws deep into its underbelly. He felt organs rupture. The stinger beast convulsed, its tail striking wildly. One blow caught Leo across the chest, the stinger scraping against his armor but failing to penetrate. With a final, savage twist, Leo tore out its throat. The creature collapsed, twitching. Leo stood over it, breathing evenly. His body hummed with efficiency. No adrenaline, no fear, just the clean execution of a task. He looked at the venom sacs at the base of the tail, still pulsing with residual life. His insatiable gut growled. He didn't hesitate. Using his claws, he sliced open the sacs and scooped out the gelatinous venom glands. They were warm, throbbing in his hand. He ate them. The transformation was swift and precise. Pain lanced through his wrists, sharp and focused. He watched as twin slits opened on the undersides of each wrist, just above the clawed hands. From them emerged retractable stingers, needle-thin and glistening with a clear, viscous fluid. He flexed his hands, and the stingers shot out, then retracted smoothly. They were tools, perfect and deadly. Paralytic venom, his gut told him. Fast-acting, non-lethal unless overdosed. Efficient. The cost came like a theft in the night. He was standing in sunlight. That was the memory, a peaceful day before the rifts, before the monsters. He was lying on grass, eyes closed, feeling the warmth on his skin. The sensation was vivid, the gentle heat, the way it seeped into his bones, the smell of clean air and growing things. It was a memory of safety, of being human. Then it was gone. Not faded, not distant. Erased. The feeling of sunlight on his skin vanished from his neural library, leaving only the cold fact that such a thing had once existed. Leo blinked. The tunnel was dark, damp, smelling of blood and venom. He felt nothing about the loss. His mind catalogued it, another trade, power for humanity. Acceptable. He butchered the stinger beast efficiently, carving out edible muscle tissue. The meat was lean, likely toxic to normal humans, but his mutated system could process it. He bundled it in a piece of torn tarp from the tunnel and slung it over his shoulder. His new stingers rested against his wrists, dormant but ready. When he returned to camp, dawn was bleeding gray light into the sky. The fire had burned low. The survivors were awake, watching him approach. They saw the blood on his armor, the bundle of meat, and the way he moved, smooth, predatory, utterly controlled. His mutations were fully visible now, the clawed arm, the chitinous torso, the subtle shift under his jacket where the tendrils lay, and the fresh, barely closed slits on his wrists. Leo dropped the meat near the fire. "It's clean," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Eat." No one moved immediately. Tomas stared at the stingers on Leo's wrists, his face pale. Lena looked like she might be sick. Rick's hand drifted toward the knife at his belt. Only Mara met Leo's eyes, and what she saw there made her expression tighten. "What happened to your wrists?" Tomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Adaptation," Leo said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They could see the monster he was becoming. They ate in silence. The meat was tough, gamey, but it was food. Leo took a portion and ate apart from them, his back to the group. He could feel their fear like a physical presence. It didn't bother him. Fear was a tool, a deterrent. Useful. When the meal was done, Mara approached him. She held a piece of folded paper, brittle with age. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were weary. "We found this in the mall's office, before it burned," she said softly, unfolding the paper. It was a map, hand-drawn, faded by time and moisture. One of the old researchers left it. He was studying the mutations. Leo looked at the map. It showed a region to the north, beyond the city's ruins. A single location was marked with a symbol he didn't recognize, a circle with a line through it. Next to it, in smudged ink, were the words, "Purification Lab Theoretical Reversal Protocol. Last Hope." Mara's voice dropped lower, for his ears only. "They say it can undo what's been done. Not just heal mutations, but reverse them. Bring back what was lost." Leo stared at the map. The paper felt fragile in his claws. A place that might reverse mutations. That might restore memories. That might make him human again. For the first time since the mall fell, something stirred in the cold emptiness where his emotions had been. It was faint, fragile, like the first crack in ice. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was the possibility of hope. He looked at Mara. How far? Days. Through deadlands and worse. She folded the map and pressed it into his hand. "It's a rumor, Leo. Nothing more. But it's all we have." He took the map. The paper crinkled in his grip. Around them, the survivors watched, their fear momentarily overshadowed by a desperate, hungry curiosity. Leo's new stingers itched against his wrists. The memory of sunlight was gone forever, but this map, this rumor, it was a thread in the dark. He didn't smile. He didn't feel excitement. But he tucked the map into his jacket, next to the silent, coiled tendrils, and looked north, where the ruins gave way to unknown horrors. The hunter had a new prey, not a monster, but a ghost of his former self. The morning light filtered through a haze of chemical mist, casting the ruined city in sickly shades of green and yellow. Leo led the way through what had once been a commercial district, his enhanced vision cutting through the toxic fog like a blade through rotten flesh. Behind him, the 5 survivors moved with the tense, measured steps of prey animals, Mara at the front, then Tomas, Rick, Lena, and Jax bringing up the rear, their weapons held ready but their eyes darting nervously between the crumbling buildings. Leo's chitinous plates shifted with each step, a faint clicking sound that made Lena flinch whenever they passed through particularly quiet stretches. He could feel the survivor's discomfort like a physical pressure against his back, but the emotion registered only as data, a potential threat to group cohesion, a variable to manage. The memory of sunlight on his skin was gone, replaced by the constant analysis of heat signatures and shadow movements. "Keep to the alleys," Leo said without turning, his voice flat. "The main streets are too exposed." Mara moved up beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the rusted skeletons of vehicles. "You're sure about this route? The map shows the lab is northwest. This is the most direct path that avoids the rift zones." Leo pointed with his clawed hand, the 3 bony spikes extending from his knuckles glinting dully in the foul light. "But there are signs of recent activity. Boot prints. Multiple sets." He knelt, the 4 prehensile tendrils on his back twitching beneath his tattered jacket. With his enhanced vision, he could see the heat residue of footprints that had cooled hours ago, at least a dozen people, moving in formation. The pattern was too organized for ordinary scavengers. "Cultists," Mara breathed, her hand tightening on her rifle. "They patrol these ruins. Worship the things that came through the rifts." Tomas spat on the ground. "Madmen. They think the monsters are gods." "They're not wrong about the power," Leo said, standing. The words came out before he could consider their effect. He saw the way Mara's eyes narrowed, the way Rick took half a step back. "I mean, they're dangerous. We need to move quietly." They pressed on, Leo using his tendrils to test unstable flooring before the others crossed, his heat vision spotting tripwires made of bioluminescent fungus that glowed in spectrums invisible to human eyes. When they reached a collapsed overpass blocked by twisted rebar and concrete slabs, Leo simply tore through it with his clawed arm, the muscles bulging with savage strength. The survivors watched in silence as he cleared a path, their expressions a mixture of awe and revulsion. "You're getting stronger," Jack said quietly as they climbed through the new opening. "But you don't seem to care about anything anymore." Leo paused, considering the statement. He knew he should feel something, defensiveness, perhaps, or sadness. Instead, he analyzed, Jax's heart rate was elevated, his scent carried traces of fear chemicals. The observation was useful for predicting behavior, but it sparked no emotional response. "Caring gets you killed," Leo said finally, and turned to continue leading. They reached a plaza where the ground was stained with strange, iridescent fluids that bubbled slowly. The buildings here were less damaged but covered in pulsating fungal growths that released spores with each rhythmic contraction. Leo raised a hand, and the group froze. "Movement," he whispered. 3 blocks west. Human shapes, but distorted. Through the heat haze, he could make out 6 figures moving with unnatural grace. They wore tattered robes stitched with pieces of chitin and bone, and their faces were painted with patterns that mimicked monster markings. 2 of them led creatures on chains, hound-like biohorrors with too many eyes and mouths that dripped acidic saliva. "Cult patrol," Mara confirmed, her voice barely audible. "We need to go around." But as they began to retreat, one of the hounds lifted its head, its nostrils flaring. It let out a low growl that vibrated through the ground. The cultists turned as one, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of fanatical discipline. "They've scented us." Rick hissed. "Run!" Mara ordered. They broke into a sprint, but the cultists moved faster than humans should have been able to. The hounds bounded ahead, their chains snapping as they were released. Leo counted 4 hounds, each the size of a large wolf but with segmented bodies that allowed them to twist through rubble with terrifying agility. "Take cover!" Leo shouted, shoving Lena behind a collapsed wall as the first hound leaped. Its jaws snapped where her head had been. Leo's clawed arm came up in a backhand swing that caught the creature mid-air, sending it crashing into a pile of debris. But 2 more were already circling, their multiple eyes tracking every movement. Tomas fired his shotgun, the blast tearing through one hound's shoulder. The creature barely flinched, the wound sealing over with rapidly regenerating tissue. They heal too fast. Tomas yelled. Leo felt the familiar hunger stirring in his gut, the insatiable gut recognizing potential traits. He pushed it down, focusing on the immediate threat. One hound lunged at Mara, and without thinking, Leo extended his right arm. The retractable stinger shot from his wrist, sinking into the creature's neck. Paralytic venom pumped into its bloodstream, and the hound collapsed, twitching but unable to move. Mara stared at the stinger as it retracted back into Leo's flesh. "You have venom now too." Later, Leo snapped, turning as the cultists arrived. There were 6 of them, fanning out to surround the survivors. Their leader was a tall man with one eye replaced by a glowing amber orb that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "Evolvers," the cultist said, his voice a wet rasp. "We've been tracking your kind. The blessed ones who consume the gifts of the Riftborn." Leo positioned himself between the cultists and the survivors. "Let us pass." "Pass?" The cultist laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You don't understand. You're not prey. You're potential. The High Priestess wants specimens like you, those who can assimilate the sacred flesh without rejection." The remaining hounds circled, held back by some unseen command. Leo's mind raced through options. Fight? Possible, but the cultists were armed with weapons that glowed with the same amber light as the leader's eye. Run. The survivors were already exhausted, and the hounds would outpace them. "Take the others," the leader ordered his followers. "The evolver is mine." 2 cultists moved toward Mara and the survivors. Tomas raised his shotgun, but one of the cultists gestured, and the weapon grew hot in his hands, forcing him to drop it with a cry of pain. Leo moved. His tendrils shot out, wrapping around the wrists of the 2 advancing cultists and yanking them off their feet. At the same time, he lunged at the leader, claws extended. The cultist didn't flinch, he simply raised a hand, and a wave of force slammed into Leo, throwing him back against a wall. Chitin plates cracked under the impact. Leo tasted blood in his mouth. The hunger roared to life, demanding sustenance, demanding power. One of the paralyzed hounds lay nearby, still breathing. As the cult leader advanced, chanting words that made the air vibrate, Leo made a decision. He rolled to the hound, tore open its skull with his claws, and ripped out a pulsing, multi-lobed organ that glistened with neural fluid. "No!" Mara screamed, understanding what he was about to do. But the hunger was too strong. Leo shoved the olfactory organ into his mouth, swallowing it whole. The taste was foul, chemical and biological, like inhaling 1,000 scents at once. Then the mutation hit. Pain exploded behind his eyes as new sensory pathways burned themselves into his brain. He could suddenly smell everything, the fierce sweat of the survivors, the fungal spores in the air, the unique scent signature of each cultist, the distant pheromone trails of other biohorrors. His nostrils flared, adapting, reshaping themselves to process the flood of information. And as the power settled, something else slipped away. A memory surfaced briefly, a girl with freckles and shy eyes, leaning in close behind the school bleachers as the sun set. The warmth of her lips against his, the racing of his heart, the feeling of being known and knowing in return. He reached for it, tried to hold on, but it dissolved like smoke in wind. The emotional resonance, the joy, the nervousness, the tender vulnerability, vanished completely, leaving only the factual recollection that such an event had occurred. The first kiss. Gone. Leo stood, his eyes now seeing the world in layers of scent as much as light and heat. The cult leader hesitated, his confidence faltering at the sudden transformation. "What have you done?" the cultist whispered. "What I had to," Leo said, and his voice was colder than it had ever been. He could now track the cultists by their unique scent signatures, could anticipate their movements by the minute changes in their body chemistry. When the leader gestured again, Leo was already moving, dodging the amber force with unnatural speed. His claws found the cultist's throat, and there was no ceremony to it, just efficient, brutal termination. The remaining cultists stared in horror as their leader fell. Then they broke, fleeing into the ruins. The hounds, bereft of commands, slunk away after them. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. They all stared at Leo, who stood amid the carnage, his body now marked by subtly reshaped nostrils that flared with each breath, processing the world in olfactory dimensions they couldn't comprehend. You ate it, Mara said, her voice hollow. After everything I told you. It was necessary, Leo replied. He could smell her disappointment, her fear, her dawning realization that the man she tried to help was disappearing piece by piece. The sense meant nothing to him beyond tactical information. Jax approached the dead hound, looking at the torn-open skull. What did it cost you this time? Leo considered lying. Considered saying nothing. But the part of him that still valued efficiency recognized that deception would create more problems than truth. A memory. From before. It doesn't matter. Everything you lose matters. Lena shouted suddenly, tears in her eyes. You're becoming one of them. Leo turned his new senses toward her, analyzing. Elevated cortisol, adrenaline spike, genuine distress. My abilities kept us alive. That's what matters now. He began walking again, not waiting for consensus. After a moment, the survivors followed, their footsteps heavy with resignation. They traveled until night fell, finding shelter in the basement of a collapsed office building. Leo took first watch, standing at the entrance while the others tried to sleep. His enhanced senses painted the night in vivid detail, the scent trails of nocturnal biohorrors, the distant chemical signatures of rift zones, the unique olfactory fingerprints of each sleeping survivor. And then, as midnight approached, he caught a new scent on the wind. It was massive, overwhelming, the smell of ozone and burning meat, of feathers and rage. He looked up, his heat vision piercing the darkness. High above, something enormous circled on wings that blotted out the stars. It had the general shape of a bird of prey but scaled up to nightmare proportions, with a wingspan that must have stretched 50 meters or more. Serrated talons gleamed in the faint moonlight, and a beak that could crush steel open to release a silent cry that vibrated through Leo's very bones. He could smell its hunger from here. Could track its flight path as it began to descend, drawn by some signal he couldn't identify. The creature, a sky ripper, his newly acquired knowledge supplied, was hunting. And it was coming directly toward their position. Leo's hand went to his clawed arm, the spikes extending fully. His tendrils twitched in anticipation. His stingers itched to deploy. Every mutation he'd acquired prepared him for this moment, but as he looked at the approaching horror, he felt only cold calculation. No fear. No awe. Just assessment of threat levels and tactical options. The Sky Ripper's shadow fell across the ruins, growing larger with each beat of its terrible wings. Leo turned to wake the others, his voice utterly calm as he spoke the words that would change everything. We have company. The Sky Ripper's shadow fell over the collapsed building like a shroud of death. Leo's enhanced senses had warned them moments before, the rush of displaced air, the faint scent of ozone and decay carried on the wind, but now the creature was here, and its presence was a physical weight pressing down on the ruined concrete and twisted rebar where they'd taken shelter. It circled once, a silhouette against the bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky, wings wider than a truck was long. Leathery membranes stretched between bony struts, catching the faint light in a way that made them look like stained glass windows in some cathedral of nightmares. The survivors, Mara, Tomas, Rick, Lena, and Jax, crouched behind what remained of a structural column, their breathing shallow and panicked. Leo stood slightly apart, his chitinous armor plates shifting with each measured breath. He could see the heat signature of the creature through the broken ceiling, a brilliant orange core surrounded by cooler blues and greens where its wing muscles worked. Stay low, Leo said, his voice flat. He didn't feel the fear that tightened the others' faces. He only calculated angles, distances, weaknesses. The memory of sunlight on his skin was gone, and with it, any warmth that might have colored his words. The Sky Ripper dove. It came not with a scream but with a sound like tearing canvas, the air ripping around its talons. Those claws were as long as a man's forearm, curved and black as obsidian, designed for plucking prey from the ground. It targeted Tomas first. The man had shifted position, exposing a shoulder. The creature adjusted mid-dive with terrifying grace. Leo moved before thought. His clawed arm shot out, the three bony spikes extending as he shoved Tomas backward. The talons missed flesh but scraped across Leo's chitinous plates with a screech that set teeth on edge. The impact drove him to one knee, pain flaring through his torso despite the armor. He could feel cracks forming in the biological plating, a network of fine fractures that would need time to heal. The Sky Ripper banked hard, wings beating to gain altitude again. Tomas scrambled back, eyes wide with terror. It's coming back, he shouted, voice cracking. Mara raised her makeshift spear, hands trembling. We need to get to better cover, she yelled over the wind from the creature's wings. But there was no better cover. The building had collapsed inward, leaving them in a bowl of debris with only partial walls standing. The Sky Ripper knew it had them trapped. It circled again, lower this time, studying its prey. Leo tracked it with his thermal vision, noting how the heat concentrated in its chest, where its heart would be, and along the leading edges of its wings where muscles worked hardest. "It'll pick us off one by one," Rick said, pressing himself against the concrete. "We need to run." "Running is death," Leo said. He flexed his clawed hand, feeling the strength in those thickened fingers. The spikes along his forearm caught the dim light. "It's too fast." The creature dove again. This time it went for Lena, who had edged toward a gap in the rubble. Leo's four prehensile tendrils snapped out from his back, wrapping around her waist and yanking her back just as the talons closed on empty air. The Sky Ripper pulled up, but not before one wingtip brushed against a jagged piece of rebar protruding from the debris. A tear opened in the leathery membrane, not deep but visible. Leo's eyes fixed on that tear. The insatiable gut stirred in his abdomen, a familiar, hungry presence. It recognized potential. It always did. The Sky Ripper landed on what remained of the building's roof, talons digging into concrete. It tilted its head, bird-like, studying them with eyes that glowed with faint bioluminescence. Up close, Leo could see the details, the way its feathers were actually overlapping scales, the way its beak was more like a serrated bony plate, the way its neck muscles corded as it prepared to strike again. "We need a distraction," Mara said, her voice tight. "Something to make it hesitate." Leo didn't answer. He was already moving, climbing the debris pile toward the creature. His claws found purchase in cracked concrete, his tendrils helping him balance. The survivors stared, their fear momentarily overshadowed by disbelief. "Leo, what are you doing?" Jax called out. But Leo didn't hear the question, or if he did, it didn't register. His mind was a cold, focused thing. The memory of his father's voice had been there this morning, a faint echo from childhood, words he couldn't quite make out but whose tone had been comforting. Now, as he climbed, he realized that echo was fading, being pushed aside by the calculations of survival. The Sky Ripper noticed his approach. It shifted its weight, talons scraping concrete. It didn't see him as a threat, not yet. To it, he was just another morsel climbing toward its beak. When Leo was halfway up, the creature struck. Not with a dive, but with a quick, snapping motion of its neck, beak aiming to pluck him from the debris. Leo dropped flat, the serrated edge passing inches above his head. As it pulled back, he lunged. His clawed hand shot out, not at the creature's body, but at the torn wing membrane. His fingers closed on the leathery material, and he pulled with all his enhanced strength. A section ripped free with a sound like wet paper tearing, about the size of his torso. The Sky Ripper shrieked, a sound that was part bird, part something far less natural, and recoiled, wings beating frantically. Leo didn't hesitate. He shoved the piece of wing membrane into his mouth. The taste was foul, like rotten meat and chemicals, but the insatiable gut didn't care about taste. It cared about assimilation. He chewed once, twice, forcing the tough material down his throat. Almost immediately, the familiar heat bloomed in his gut, spreading through his body like wildfire. Pain followed. White-hot and concentrated along his back, between his shoulder blades where the four tendrils emerged. Those tendrils retracted with a wet sound, pulling back into his body. The skin there bulged, stretched, then split open. Not with blood, but with something darker, something that gleamed with wetness in the dim light. New structures pushed their way out, bony struts extending from his spine, unfolding like grotesque umbrellas. Membrane stretched between them, thin at first but thickening rapidly, taking on the same leathery texture as the Sky Ripper's wings. They were smaller than the creature's, scaled to his human frame, but they were wings nonetheless. And as they formed, something else was taken. The memory of his father's voice, the last clear memory he had of the man, dissolved like smoke in wind. He'd been trying to recall it just this morning, the way his father had called him son with that particular gravelly warmth, the way he'd laughed at some long-forgotten joke. Now there was only silence where that voice had been. Not even an echo remained. The emotional connection, the love, the respect, the childish need for approval, all of it vanished, leaving behind a cold, empty space in his mind. Leo didn't scream. He didn't mourn. He simply accepted the trade. Power for memory. Survival for humanity. The wings finished forming, dripping with biological fluids that quickly dried. He flexed them experimentally, feeling the unfamiliar muscles respond. They weren't fully developed, he could sense that, but they were functional. The Sky Ripper, recovering from the injury to its wing, launched itself at him. This time it was angry, no longer playing with its food. Talons extended, beak open, it came in a straight line, too fast for the survivors below to do anything but watch. Leo pushed off from the debris with his new wings. The first beat was clumsy, uncoordinated, but it lifted him just enough to avoid the direct strike. The creature's talons scraped along his armored torso, deepening the cracks but not penetrating. As it passed, Leo reached out with both clawed hands and grabbed onto its neck. The Sky Ripper thrashed, trying to shake him off. Its wings beat frantically, lifting both of them into the air. They rose above the collapsed building, circling in a clumsy, violent dance. Leo held on, his claws digging deep into the creature's scaled flesh. His own wings beat awkwardly, helping him maintain his grip rather than providing real flight. Below, the survivors stared up, faces pale in the growing light. Mara had one hand over her mouth. Tomas had dropped his weapon. They were witnessing something beyond their understanding, a man becoming monster to fight monster. The Sky Ripper tried to roll in mid-air, attempting to dislodge him. Leo's tendrils, which had re-emerged alongside the wings, wrapped around the creature's neck, adding to his grip. He could feel its pulse through his claws, a rapid, panicked thrumming. He could smell its fear now, a sharp, acrid scent that mingled with the ozone of its biology. With a final effort, Leo drove his clawed hand deep into the side of the creature's neck, aiming for the major arteries he could sense through his thermal vision. The bony spikes on his forearm tore through scale and flesh. The Sky Ripper convulsed, its wings faltering. They fell together, a tangle of limbs and wings, crashing into the debris pile beside the collapsed building. The impact drove the air from Leo's lungs, but his armor absorbed most of the force. The creature beneath him twitched once, twice, then went still. Leo pushed himself up, standing on the Sky Ripper's corpse. His wings folded against his back awkwardly, still unfamiliar. Biological fluids, his and the creature's, dripped from his claws. He looked down at his hands, at the way the blood looked black in the dim light. The survivors approached cautiously. Mara came first, her eyes wide as she took in his new mutations, the leathery wings, the way they emerged from between the chitinous plates on his back, the way they shifted with his breathing. "Leo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to look at her, and she took a step back at whatever she saw in his eyes. There was no triumph there, no relief at survival. Only calculation. Only the cold assessment of threats and resources. "It's dead," he said, his voice empty of emotion. Before anyone could respond, Mara's attention snapped to the horizon. Her sharp eyes, trained by survival, had caught movement. She pointed. "Look." Figures emerged from the ruins around them. Not bio-horrors, but humans. Dozens of them, dressed in ragged robes stained with strange symbols. Cultists. They moved with purpose, surrounding the collapsed building, cutting off any escape route. They carried makeshift weapons, shards of metal, pipes, a few actual blades, and their faces were painted with patterns that mimicked monster scales. At their head stood a man taller than the others, his robes more elaborate, his paint fresher. He had eyes that burned with fanaticism, and he stared directly at Leo with a hunger that had nothing to do with physical appetite. "Perfect," the fanatic said, his voice carrying across the distance. "The evolving one. We've been tracking you since you killed our brothers." Leo's new wings twitched, the membranes tightening. His advanced tracking senses picked up the scent of the cultists, sweat, blood, and something else, something chemical and wrong. He could hear their heartbeats, rapid with excitement rather than fear. Mara moved closer to Leo, her voice low and urgent. "The purification lab," she said. "It's close. Less than a mile from here, according to the map. But we'll never make it with them between us and it." The fanatic took a step forward, his followers spreading out to flank them. "Your mutations," he said, his eyes fixed on Leo's wings, his claws, his armor. "They're beautiful. A gift from the rift. We will take them. We will learn how to make them our own." Leo flexed his claws. The stingers in his wrists itched with the need to deploy. His wings shifted, testing the air. He calculated numbers, distances, threats. And in the cold, silent place where his father's voice should have been, there was only the calculation of survival, and the faint, fading hope that the purification lab might still save what little remained of the man he'd once been. The morning light filtered through the toxic haze, casting a sickly green glow over the ruins where Leo and the survivors huddled. Mara's voice was a low whisper, barely audible over the distant skittering of biohorrors. The lab is close, but so are they. I can feel their eyes on us. Leo's new wings, leathery and still aching from their recent sprouting, twitched against his back, a constant reminder of the price he'd paid. He flexed his clawed hand, the 3 bony spikes protruding from his knuckles glinting dully. The memory of his father's voice was gone, leaving a hollow echo in his mind, and he struggled to recall why that loss should have mattered. Tomas and Rick crouched beside a pile of rubble, their makeshift weapons, a rusted pipe and a sharpened piece of rebar, held tight. Lena and Jax watched the perimeter, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Leo's advanced tracking senses, a recent acquisition from the hound's olfactory organ, tingled with the scent of decay and sweat. He could smell the cultists before he saw them, a dozen figures emerging from the shadows, armed with crude bioweapons that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. Their leader, a man with skin mottled by strange growths, stepped forward. Kale, Leo thought, the name surfacing from Mara's earlier warnings. The Evolver, Kale called out, his voice raspy and filled with reverence. We've been waiting for you. The rift has blessed you with gifts we seek to understand. Leo didn't respond. His emotions were a distant fog, but instinct screamed danger. He spread his wings, the leathery membranes catching the foul air, and launched himself upward just as the cultists charged. The survivors scrambled, Mara shouting orders to fall back toward a collapsed tunnel entrance they'd marked as an escape route. Leo landed among the cultists, his retractable stingers snapping out from his wrists. He drove one into the neck of a cultist wielding a barbed whip, the paralytic venom taking effect instantly. The man crumpled, his eyes wide with shock. Leo's claws tore through another's bioarmor, the savage strength of his mutated arm making short work of the crude defenses. But the cultists were relentless, their weapons, living tendrils that lashed out, acidic spores that burst on impact, forcing him to dodge and weave. He used his wings to gain altitude, swooping down to strike, but a net of glowing fibers shot from a cultist's device, tangling around his legs. He crashed to the ground, the impact jarring his chitinous armor. From the corner of his eye, Leo saw Tomas near the tunnel entrance. The survivor's face was twisted with jealousy, his eyes fixed on Leo's wings. As Mara yelled for them to retreat into the tunnel, Tomas hesitated, then shoved a loose support beam, sending a cascade of debris crashing down to block the entrance. We don't need a monster leading us. Tomas screamed, his voice cracking with fear and resentment. The betrayal was swift, leaving Mara and the others trapped outside with the cultists closing in. Leo struggled against the net, his tendrils from his back writhing to cut the fibers, but more cultists piled on, pinning him with weighted chains. Kale approached, his mutated features, a third eye blinking on his forehead, patches of scales on his cheeks, gleaming with fanatic zeal. Such perfection, Kale murmured, running a gloved hand over Leo's wing. The insatiable gut, we will unlock its secrets. Leo fought, his venomous stingers lashing out, but a cultist jammed a device against his temple, a psychic dampener that sent waves of numbness through his mind, suppressing his mutations. His wings folded uselessly, his claws retracted, and the world blurred into a haze of pain. He was dragged through the ruins to a makeshift compound, a collection of bioorganic structures grown from the flesh of dead monsters. The air reeked of rot and strange chemicals. Kale's followers shoved Leo into a cage that pulsed with a faint heartbeat, the bars were living tissue, warm and slick to the touch. This cage feeds on your energy, Kale explained, his voice echoing in the dim chamber. We worship the rift, and you are its greatest gift. We will study you, replicate your mutations, create hybrids to serve our cause. Leo slumped against the bars, the psychic dampener humming softly, dulling his senses. He could feel his humanity slipping further, the concept of home, a place of safety, of belonging, fading from his mind like smoke. He was rootless, adrift in a sea of monstrous power. Hours passed, marked only by the slow drip of fluid from the ceiling. Leo's hunger gnawed at him, the insatiable gut craving more. In a moment of desperation, he scraped a piece of the cage's living tissue with his teeth, the taste bitter and metallic. He swallowed, and a surge of warmth spread through his body, a minor regeneration, knitting small cuts on his arms. The cost was immediate, the last vestiges of home vanished, leaving only a cold emptiness. He could no longer remember what it meant to have a place to return to feel anchored to anything but survival. Outside the cage, Kale prepared a table lined with surgical tools that gleamed under bioluminescent fungi. We begin the dissection at dawn, he announced to his acolytes. Record every reaction. The Evolver's heart may hold the key to our ascension. Leo watched, his emotions a flat line, but a spark of defiance flickered, a remnant of the man he'd been. He focused on the sounds beyond the compound, the faint rustle of movement, Mara's whispered voice coordinating with the remaining survivors. They were planning something, a desperate rescue. He clung to that hope, even as Kale's tools glinted in the low light, promising a fate worse than death. The chapter ended with Leo in the bioorganic cage, his body healing slowly from the scrapes, his mind barren of the concept of home. Kale stood over him, a scalpel in hand, as shadows moved outside the compound, Mara, Rick, Lena, and Jax, armed and determined, preparing to breach the cult's defenses. The air was thick with tension, the cliffhanger hanging on the edge of a knife. The bioorganic cage pulsed with a sickly rhythm, its fleshy walls contracting like a living lung around Leo. He lay on the damp floor, his mutation suppressed by the psychic dampeners humming in the air, a low, resonant thrum that felt like needles in his skull. His chitinous armor plates felt heavy and inert, his wings folded uselessly against his back, and the tendrils from his spine lay limp. Through the cage's translucent membrane, he could see the cult compound, a nightmarish fusion of human architecture and bio-horror growths, with pulsating veins snaking across rusted metal walls and fungal spores drifting in the stale air. The scent of decay and ozone clung to everything. Leo's mind was a hollow echo chamber. The recent mutation, the minor regeneration from eating the cage's tissue, had erased his memory of home. He tried to recall the warmth of a fireplace, the sound of laughter in a safe place, but there was only a void, a cold absence that made his chest tighten. He focused on the physical sensations instead, the ache in his limbs from the restraints, the damp chill seeping through his clothes, the faint heat signatures of cultists moving beyond the cage. His enhanced night vision and thermal sight painted the world in shades of gray and red, but it felt detached, like watching a screen. He thought of Mara and the others, Rick, Lena, Jax, somewhere outside. Would they come? Or had Tomas's betrayal shattered their trust? The question stirred no fear, only a clinical curiosity. Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the compound. The ground trembled, and the cage's membrane rippled violently. Shouts erupted, panicked, chaotic, followed by the staccato crack of gunfire. Leo's tracking senses, honed from the hound's olfactory organ, picked up the scent of smoke and blood, mingling with the acrid tang of cultist pheromones. He recognized Mara's voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the noise. Now. Go for the dampeners. This was the diversion. Leo pushed himself up, his muscles straining against the psychic suppression. The dampeners were embedded in the walls around him, glowing with a faint blue light. He focused on his regeneration mutation, feeling a sluggish warmth spread through his body. It wasn't fast, but it was enough. He tore at the organic restraints binding his wrists, thick, sinewy cords that bit into his skin. As they snapped, his flesh knit together slowly, leaving faint scars. He stood, his claws extending from his right arm, the 3 bony spikes gleaming in the dim light. The tendrils on his back twitched, responding to his will, and he used them to pry at the cage's membrane. It resisted, tough and elastic, but with a savage pull, he ripped an opening. Stepping out, the compound was a scene of controlled chaos. Cultists in ragged robes scrambled, some firing crude weapons, others muttering prayers to the bio-horrors. Leo saw Mara leading Rick, Lena, and Jax through a side corridor, their faces set in grim determination as they disabled dampener nodes with improvised explosives. No new characters emerged, just the familiar survivors, fighting with the desperation of those who'd lost too much. Leo moved silently, his advanced senses mapping the layout, the main hall ahead, where Kale would be. He found the cult leader in a chamber adorned with grotesque trophies, monster parts preserved in amber-like resin. Kale stood before a pulsating altar, his mutated form more pronounced now. Scales covered half his face, and his third eye glowed with an eerie light. He turned as Leo entered, a smile twisting his lips. The Evolver breaks free. Perfect. Your insatiable gut will be mine to study. Leo didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary, a human luxury he could barely grasp. He lunged, his claws aimed for Kale's throat. But Kale was faster, his body enhanced by multiple monster assimilations. He dodged, and a burst of psychic energy slammed into Leo, making his vision blur. The dampeners in the room amplified it, a crushing weight that threatened to pin him down. Leo staggered, his wings unfurling instinctively, but they felt leaden. Kale laughed, advancing. You think you're unique? I've consumed parts from a dozen horrors. But the corruption, it eats at the mind. I can feel it. As Kale spoke, Leo noticed the flaws. Patches of his scales were necrotic, oozing black fluid, and his movements had a jerky, uncontrolled quality. The cult leader's power came at a cost. His humanity was fraying, just like Leo's, but without the precision of the insatiable gut. It was a messy, brutal corruption. Leo used his tendrils to grapple, wrapping them around Kale's arms, but the cult leader tore free with inhuman strength, leaving deep gashes in the organic tendrils. Pain flared, distant and muted. Leo's regeneration kicked in, the wounds closing slowly, but it wasn't enough. In the struggle, Kale pinned him against the altar, his claws digging into Leo's chitinous armor. Your heart, it holds the key. I'll take it, and become the perfect hybrid. Leo's mind raced, not with fear, but with strategy. His insatiable gut whispered to him, a primal urge. He remembered the risk. Eating a mutated heart could grant power, but at a terrible price. As Kale leaned in, Leo acted. With a swift motion, he drove his clawed arm into Kale's chest, bypassing the scales. The cult leader gasped, his third eye widening in shock. Leo tore out the heart, a grotesque, pulsating organ veined with iridescent colors and studded with tiny, crystalline growths. Without hesitation, Leo brought it to his mouth and bit. The taste was foul, metallic and sweet, like rotten fruit and ozone. His gut activated instantly, a searing heat spreading through his body. New power surged, psychic resistance, a mental shield that pushed back the dampener's effects, and enhanced durability, making his armor plates feel denser, more resilient. But the cost hit him like a physical blow. Memories of his childhood home, the vague impressions left after earlier losses, dissolved entirely. He saw flashes, a sunlit yard, a wooden fence, a woman's voice singing, but they shattered into nothingness, leaving behind only a cold, empty space where warmth once lived. He dropped to his knees, the heart's remnants crumbling to dust in his hands. Kale collapsed, dead, his body already decaying into the bioorganic mass of the altar. The chamber shook, cracks spreading across the walls as the compound's structural integrity failed. Leo forced himself up, his new psychic resistance allowing him to move freely despite the collapsing dampeners. He found Mara and the others in the hallway, their faces pale with exhaustion. Leo, we have to go, now. Mara shouted, pulling him toward an exit. They fled through crumbling corridors, bio-horror growths withering around them. The compound groaned, ceilings caving in, and cultists screamed as they were buried. Leo led the way, his enhanced senses guiding them through the chaos. As they burst outside into the toxic ruins, the air thick with ash and spores, the entire structure collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and organic matter. Panting, the group paused in the shadow of a ruined skyscraper. Mara checked on Rick, who had a shallow cut on his arm, while Lena and Jax kept watch. Leo stood apart, his mind reeling. The new mutation, psychic resistance and durability, felt solid, a tangible upgrade, but the emptiness inside was profound. He tried to recall anything from his childhood, but it was all gone, replaced by a hollow ache. Mara approached, her eyes searching his. You okay? Leo nodded, his voice flat. The lab is close. I can sense it. He focused his tracking senses, extending them toward the rumored location. But what he detected wasn't the quiet of an abandoned facility. Strange biosignals pulsed in the distance, erratic, aggressive, like a heartbeat out of sync. Heat signatures clustered around the structure, moving in chaotic patterns. The purification lab wasn't deserted, it was alive with activity, overrun by something he couldn't yet identify. A chill ran down his spine, the first flicker of something akin to dread in his numbed emotions. The purification lab rose from the earth like a half-buried corpse, its concrete walls cracked and weeping with thick, pulsating biomass. Leo stood at the edge of the crater that had swallowed the facility's lower levels, his enhanced vision scanning the structure. The biomass pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, veins of darker tissue threading through it like infected capillaries. It breathed, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that made the entire structure seem alive. Mara crouched beside him, her breath fogging in the cold air. It's worse than I imagined, she whispered, her voice tight. The cultists said it was abandoned. This isn't abandoned. Leo's thermal vision painted the scene in gradients of heat. The biomass registered as warm, living tissue, while deeper within the facility, cold spots indicated structural voids. But there were other heat signatures, clusters of them, moving with purpose through the corridors. Not human. Their heat patterns were wrong, too intense in some areas, too cold in others. Evolved bio-horrors, guarding something. There are at least a dozen inside, Leo said, his voice flat. The psychic resistance he'd gained from Kale's heart hummed at the edge of his awareness, a subtle barrier against the lab's oppressive atmosphere. But something else pressed against his mind, not a psychic attack, but a weight. The loss of his childhood home memories had left a hollow space, and now the lab's presence seemed to seep into it. Mara glanced at him. Can you sense what they are? Guardians, Leo said. The word came without emotion. He remembered the concept of guardians, protectors, defenders, but the feeling that should have accompanied it, the urgency or dread, was muted. His mind processed the threat with mechanical efficiency. They're clustered around the central areas. Probably protecting the database. He flexed the claws on his right hand, the 3 bony spikes thicker now, gleaming under the pale sky. His chitinous armor plates shifted with the movement, a faint rasp of hardened tissue. The leathery wings folded against his back felt heavy, still new enough to ache at the joints. But they were functional. He'd tested them during their approach, short glides that carried him over rubble and fissures. The memory of his father's voice, lost to the Skyripper mutation, was gone completely, not even an echo remained. We need to get to that database, Mara said, checking her weapon, a scavenged rifle with makeshift modifications. If there's a cure, it'll be in the central servers. But we'll have to fight through. Leo nodded. Stay behind me. My armor can take hits. They descended into the crater, picking their way down a slope of collapsed concrete and twisted rebar. The biomass grew thicker as they approached the lab's entrance, a gaping maw where doors had once been. Now, fleshy tendrils draped across the opening, quivering at their approach. Leo extended a clawed hand and sliced through them. The tendrils recoiled, spraying a viscous fluid that sizzled where it hit the ground. His enhanced durability meant the droplets barely stung his skin, but Mara stepped back, wiping splatter from her jacket. Inside, the lab was a nightmare of transformation. Corridors stretched into darkness, lit only by the biomass's faint glow. The walls were no longer sterile white, they were covered in a leathery membrane that pulsed in time with the structure's breathing. Floor tiles had been pushed up by root-like growths, creating treacherous footing. The air smelled of decay and something sweetly chemical, like rotting fruit mixed with antiseptic. Leo's night vision adjusted, painting the corridor in shades of gray and green. His heat signatures sharpened. 3 bio-horrors waited around the first corner, their forms indistinct blobs of warmth. He held up a hand, signaling Mara to stop. 3 ahead, he murmured. Evolved types. Not like the flesh-hounds. He could feel the insatiable gut stirring at the proximity of so much monster flesh. It was a low hunger, a pull toward consumption. But he pushed it down. Every mutation cost memories. He'd already lost so much, his father's voice, the concept of home, the warmth of his sister's smile, that one still lingered as a ghost, though the memory itself was gone. What would be next? He didn't know, and the not knowing was a cold calculation in his mind. The first bio-horror rounded the corner. It was a hunched thing, all sinew and exposed bone, with too many joints in its limbs. Its head was a distorted mass of sensory organs, multiple eyes, slitted nostrils, a mouth that opened vertically. It moved with a skittering gait, claws scraping against the membranous floor. Leo didn't wait. He lunged, his clawed arm striking out. The bio-horror dodged with surprising speed, but Leo's wings snapped open, giving him a burst of momentum. He slammed into the creature, driving his claws into its chest. The impact jarred up his arm, but his enhanced durability absorbed it. The bio-horror thrashed, but Leo twisted, tearing through tissue and bone. It fell, twitching. The other 2 attacked in unison. One spat a glob of acidic mucus. Leo raised his armored forearm, and the fluid sizzled against the chitinous plates, eating at the surface but not penetrating. The other lunged low, aiming for his legs. Leo's prehensile tendrils, 4 thick, muscular appendages that sprouted from his back, uncoiled and lashed out. They wrapped around the creature's limbs, holding it fast. With his free hand, he activated the retractable stingers in his wrist. Twin needles shot forth, dripping with paralytic venom. He drove them into the bio-horror's neck. The creature convulsed, then went still. The third, seeing its companions fall, tried to retreat. Leo's advanced tracking senses locked onto its heat signature. He didn't need to chase it, his wings beat once, lifting him over the rubble-strewn floor. He landed in front of it, blocking its escape. A single claw strike to the head ended it. Mara caught up, her rifle raised. That was efficient, she said, her eyes wide. She looked at the tendrils retracting into Leo's back, at the venom dripping from his stingers. You're adapting faster. It's necessary, Leo said. He knelt beside the first bio-horror, examining its body. Its scales were thick, overlapping plates that shimmered with an iridescent sheen. Dragon-like, though smaller than the Sky Rippers. The insatiable gut tugged at him again. These scales could offer better protection. His current armor had held, but it was already scarred from acid. He needed more. He hesitated. Another mutation. Another loss. What would it take this time? He tried to remember the last time he'd felt joy, a genuine, warm feeling. It was tied to a memory of something. A sunny day. A laugh. The details were fuzzy, receding like tidewater. If he ate this, would joy go entirely? The thought should have frightened him, but it only registered as a data point, possible emotional degradation versus increased survival odds. Leo. Mara's voice was soft. You don't have to. I do, he said. His voice was flat. He dug his claws under a scale plate, pried it loose with a wet tear. The scale was as large as his palm, cool to the touch, with a texture like polished stone. He brought it to his mouth. The taste was metallic and earthy, like blood and soil. He chewed, the material tough but yielding to his enhanced jaw strength. As he swallowed, the insatiable gut activated. Heat spread through his body, starting in his stomach and radiating outward. His skin prickled, then burned. He gritted his teeth, feeling the transformation take hold. New scales erupted across his skin, sliding over his existing chitinous armor like living mail. They were darker than the bio-horrors, charcoal gray with hints of deep red at the edges. They interlocked seamlessly, covering his torso, arms, and legs. The scales on his back accommodated his wings, the leathery membranes now framed by protective plating. His face remained mostly human, but scales crept up his neck, stopping at his jawline. The mutation settled, leaving him with a full suit of dragon-scale armor. It was lighter than he expected, flexible yet impossibly hard. And the cost came. It wasn't a memory this time. It was an emotion. Joy, the capacity for it, the warmth, the lightness, drained away like water from a cracked vessel. One moment, he knew what joy felt like, the next, it was gone. He could remember the word, the concept, but the sensation itself had vanished. His reactions didn't slow, but they changed. Where before there might have been a flicker of satisfaction at the new armor, now there was only assessment, increased protection rating, improved mobility, acceptable trade-off. His humanity eroded further, leaving behind a colder, more efficient machine. He stood, testing the scales. They moved with him, silent and smooth. It's done, he said to Mara. His voice hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had, a little less light, a little more hollow. Mara watched him, her expression unreadable. What did you lose? Joy, Leo said. The word meant nothing to him now. Let's keep moving. They pressed deeper into the lab. The corridors branched, some collapsed, others clogged with biomass. Leo used his wings to navigate chasms where floors had given way, gliding across gaps with Mara clinging to his back. His thermal vision guided them around ambush points, and his stingers made quick work of smaller bio-horrors that lurked in the shadows. The new scales deflected claws and acid with ease, though each impact sent vibrations through his body that his enhanced durability dampened. They encountered more guardians, larger, more aggressive versions of the first. One had spiked tentacles that whipped through the air. Leo's tendrils tangled with them, holding them long enough for him to close in and use his claws. Another spat projectiles of hardened bone. Leo took a hit to the chest, but the scales held, though the force knocked him back a step. He recovered, lunging forward and driving his stingers into the creature's eyes. The paralytic venom worked within seconds. Through it all, Mara provided covering fire, her rifle shots precise. She was a survivor, hardened by the apocalypse, but even she gasped at the ferocity of Leo's combat. He moved with a predator's grace, every action calculated, every kill efficient. There was no rage, no fear, just motion and result. After what felt like hours, they reached a sealed door marked Central Database. The door was reinforced metal, but biomass had grown over it, tendrils worming into the seams. Leo tore it away, his scaled hands ripping through the organic matter. Behind the door was a large chamber, relatively untouched by the infestation. Banks of dead computer consoles lined the walls, their screens dark. In the center, a single terminal glowed with faint blue light. "This is it," Mara said, moving to the terminal. She brushed dust from the keyboard, her fingers tapping keys. "Power's still on, barely. Let's see what's left." Leo stood guard at the entrance, his senses alert. The chamber felt too quiet. His thermal vision showed no immediate threats, but deeper scans revealed heat signatures far below, massive ones, moving slowly. Something big was down there. The terminal flickered to life, displaying fragmented data logs. Mara scrolled through them, her brow furrowed. Most of it's corrupted, but there are entries about a cure. They called it project purification. She read aloud, her voice echoing in the silent room. The assimilation process can be reversed, but it requires a catalyst, a pure heart from a class alpha biohorror. The heart must be untainted by dimensional rift energy, a rarity in current specimens. A pure heart, Leo repeated. The term meant nothing to him emotionally, but he understood the logic. A source of uncontaminated biological material to counteract the mutations. Where do we find one? Mara kept scrolling. There's a log here, dated just before the lab fell. They were experimenting on creating a guardian to protect the research. They used a class alpha specimen, but something went wrong. Her voice dropped. The experiment created a biotitan. They couldn't control it. They sealed it in the lower levels. Leo's thermal vision focused downward. The massive heat signatures were clearer now, one enormous blob of warmth, surrounded by smaller ones. It was moving, shifting. Awakening. The log says the biotitan's heart might be pure enough, Mara said, her eyes wide. It was the original alpha specimen, before the rift energy fully corrupted it. But Leo, it's down there. And it's not dormant. As she spoke, the terminal screen flickered, showing a final log entry. The word scrolled across, timestamped from today, containment breach detected in sublevel 5. Biotitan awakening. All personnel evacuate. A deep rumble shook the chamber, vibrating through the floor. Dust sifted from the ceiling. From somewhere far below, a roar echoed, low, guttural, and filled with ancient hunger. The sound wasn't just noise, it carried a psychic weight that pressed against Leo's mind. His newly gained resistance strained under the pressure. Mara looked at him, her face pale. "It knows we're here." Leo stared at the floor, as if he could see through it to the thing beneath. The biotitan. A guardian of the lab. Its heart might be the cure. But to get it, he'd have to fight something that had been designed to be unstoppable. And with every mutation he used, every piece of himself he sacrificed, he'd become less human. The irony wasn't lost on him. To save his humanity, he might have to lose it entirely. He flexed his scaled hands, felt the wings tense on his back, the tendrils coiling. The emotion of joy was gone, but something else remained, a cold, hard determination. It was all he had left. "Then we go down," he said. The words were empty of feeling, but they carried the weight of inevitability. The air in the purification lab's lower levels tasted of rust and decayed meat. Leo's enhanced senses registered the shift immediately. The biosignals they detected from above weren't just residual energy. They were pulses, rhythmic and growing stronger with each step down the spiraling metal staircase that groaned under their weight. Mara followed close behind, her breathing measured but audible in the oppressive silence. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls that had ceased being walls long ago. Organic matter had fused with steel, creating a nightmare of pulsating veins and membranous growths that glowed with faint bioluminescence. The floor beneath their boots was slick with viscous fluid that smelled of ammonia and something sweetly rotten. "This place is alive," Mara whispered, her voice barely carrying over the distant thrumming that vibrated through the metal framework. Leo didn't answer. His thermal vision painted the world in gradients of heat, cool blues where the machinery had died, warmer yellows where residual energy lingered, and hot reds where the biomass pulsed with activity. His dragon-scale armor, now fully integrated across his torso and limbs, felt heavier here, as if the very air resisted its presence. The scales shimmered with an iridescent sheen when the occasional flicker of light caught them, but they were dulled by the grime and fluids that coated everything. They reached the bottom of the staircase. Before them stretched a vast chamber, easily the size of the Survivor Enclave's main hall back at the mall. But where that space had been filled with makeshift shelters and the sounds of human life, this one was a cathedral of horror. Organic machinery covered every surface, pulsating sacs that might have been power cells, twisting columns of chitin that supported the ceiling, networks of translucent tubes through which dark fluids pumped rhythmically. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive containment unit, its reinforced glass walls shattered outward, leaving jagged teeth of material pointing toward the room like accusing fingers. And within that broken containment, something stirred. Leo's prehensile tendrils twitched along his back, responding to the threat before his conscious mind fully registered it. The bio-titan uncoiled itself from its resting position, limbs unfolding with a sound like tearing leather. It was larger than anything he'd faced, 3 times his height even when crouched, with a body that seemed assembled from mismatched parts. Chitinous plates covered its torso in overlapping layers, while 6 multi-jointed limbs sprouted from its sides, each ending in crushing claws or serrated blades. Its head was a nightmare of sensory organs, clusters of eyes that glowed with sickly green light, mandibles that clicked together with metallic sharpness, and a crown of fleshy antennae that waved in the charged air. Class Alpha, Mara breathed, her hand tightening on her weapon. That's what the database called it. The Titan's primary eyes focused on them. Not just looked, focused, with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. It recognized them as intruders. As threats. Leo's mind worked with mechanical efficiency. Joy was gone, erased when the dragon scales had formed, but calculation remained. He assessed distances, angles of attack, potential cover. The organic machinery throughout the chamber provided some, but much of it looked fragile, likely to collapse under the Titan's weight. Stay behind the columns, he told Mara, his voice flat. Its acid spray has a 15-meter range based on the residue patterns. He remembered reading that in the database logs. He didn't remember why acid spray mattered beyond tactical considerations. The Titan moved. Not with the lumbering slowness its size suggested, but with terrifying speed. 2 of its limbs slammed into the ground where they'd been standing moments before, cracking the reinforced flooring. Leo had already launched himself sideways, his leathery wings snapping open to carry him in a short, controlled glide behind a cluster of chitinous columns. Mara dove the opposite direction, rolling behind a bank of organic machinery that hummed with residual power. Acid sprayed where Leo had been. The greenish fluid sizzled as it struck the floor, eating through metal and biomass alike. His scales tingled where droplets had splashed nearby, they resisted the corrosion, but he could feel the heat through them. He moved before the Titan could reorient. Claws extended from his right arm, the 3 bony spikes thicker and sharper than they'd been when first formed. He charged, using his wings for an extra burst of speed, aiming for the joint where one of the crushing limbs met the torso. The impact jarred through him. Chitin cracked under his strike, but didn't shatter. The Titan roared, a sound that vibrated through Leo's bones, and swung another limb. He barely dodged, the serrated blade passing centimeters from his face. His tendrils lashed out, wrapping around the attacking limb to anchor himself as he drove his stingers into the cracked joint. Paralytic venom injected with a hiss. The limb spasmed, going momentarily slack. Leo used the opening to tear free a chunk of chitin, exposing pale flesh beneath. He could see heat signatures now, vessels pumping hot fluid, clusters of nerve tissue glowing bright in his thermal vision. But the Titan wasn't done. 2 more limbs came at him from different angles. He released his hold, wings beating hard to lift him above the attack. Acid sprayed upward, forcing him to twist in midair, scales deflecting most of it but not all. Pain blossomed along his side where the acid found a gap in his armor. His minor regeneration mutation activated, flesh knitting together even as he landed. The process was slower here, hampered by something in the air or the Titan's presence. He could feel the energy drain with each healed wound. Mara provided covering fire from her position. Her shot struck the Titan's sensory clusters, causing it to flinch and redirect its attention. One of its limbs swept toward her cover, smashing through the organic machinery in an explosion of fluids and sparks. She scrambled backward, barely avoiding the follow-up strike. Leo ate the chunk of chitin he'd torn free. The taste was foul, bitter and metallic, with an aftertaste of spoiled eggs. His insatiable gut activated immediately, the familiar burning sensation spreading from his stomach through his bloodstream. New information flooded his senses, thermal patterns became sharper, more detailed. He could see not just heat signatures but temperature gradients, pressure points, weak spots in the Titan's armor where internal heat leaked through. The memory vanished as it formed. One moment he was remembering, candles on a cake, a woman's voice singing off-key, the warmth of hands clapping, and the next it was gone. Not faded, not forgotten, but erased, as if that particular file in his mind had been deleted to make room for new data. The birthday. His birthday. He knew the concept existed, knew intellectually that he must have had them, but the specific memory, the feeling attached to it, was simply absent. His reaction was purely tactical. No grief, no anger, just assessment. The thermal vision showed him the Titan's weak points now, joints where armor plates didn't fully overlap, sensory nodes at the base of its antennae, a pulsating organ near its center mass that glowed hottest of all. Its heart, he called to Mara, his voice still flat. Center mass, protected by overlapping plates. We need to crack them open. He charged again, this time aiming not for limbs but for the torso. His claws struck where thermal vision indicated a seam between plates. They bit deep, levering upward. The Titan screamed, a sound that shook loose debris from the ceiling. Acid sprayed wildly, forcing Mara to abandon her position entirely. Leo worked methodically. Claws pried. Stingers injected venom into exposed flesh to slow reactions. Tendrils wrapped around limbs to hold them momentarily at bay. Wings carried him out of range when attacks came too close. His scales deflected acid and glancing blows, though each impact sent shockwaves through his body that his enhanced durability barely absorbed. He tore free a plate. Underneath, the pulsating organ glowed like a furnace. The pure heart, or what might become one if extracted properly. It beat with rhythmic intensity, pumping whatever passed for blood through the Titan's massive form. He struck. Claws sank into the organ's outer membrane. Hot fluid sprayed, burning where it touched his skin. The Titan convulsed, all 6 limbs thrashing wildly. One struck a supporting column, bringing down a section of ceiling in a cascade of debris and biomass. Mara screamed. Leo turned, thermal vision cutting through the dust cloud. She was pinned, a fallen beam across her legs, heavier debris covering her torso. She struggled, but the weight was too much. Blood stained the floor beneath her. The Titan, wounded but not dead, began to regenerate. Flesh knitted around the hole Leo had torn in its heart organ. The damaged chitin plates regrew, crawling over the exposed area like living armor. Its movements, slowed by venom and injury, began to quicken again. Leo stood between 2 points, Mara, trapped and bleeding, and the Titan, healing and preparing for another attack. His mind calculated probabilities. If he went for Mara first, the Titan would finish regenerating and likely kill them both. If he went for the killing blow now, he might extract the heart before she bled out, but she might die anyway from her injuries or further collapse. The efficient choice was clear. Finish the Titan. Extract the heart. The cure was the priority, the only thing that mattered in the long term. But something hesitated. Not emotion, that was too strong a word for what flickered in the hollow spaces where joy and birthday memories had been. A recognition, perhaps. That Mara had come for him when he was captured. That she'd fought beside him through the lab. That she was human in ways he could no longer remember being. His claws remained extended. His tendrils twitched. The Titan took a step forward, its regenerating heart glowing brighter with each beat. And Leo didn't move. The debris shifted with a groan of tortured metal and cracking concrete. Leo's thermal vision painted Mara in shades of orange and red, her heat signature flickering like a dying ember beneath the rubble. Her leg was pinned, twisted at an unnatural angle, and her breaths came in ragged, wet gasps. Across the chamber, the Bio-Titan's massive form shuddered, its 6 multi-jointed limbs scrabbling against the floor as regenerative tissue knitted across the wounds Leo had torn open. Acidic drool sizzled where it dripped from its serrated maw, eating pits into the lab's reinforced flooring. Leo hesitated. The tactical calculation was clear: finish the Titan, extract its heart, secure the cure. His enhanced mind, stripped of joy and softened by the erosion of empathy, presented the option with cold efficiency. But something else stirred, a ghost of instinct, a memory of connection not yet fully erased. Mara's eyes met his, wide with pain but unyielding. "Don't you dare," she gritted out, as if reading his conflict. "Not for me." He moved. His dragon-scale armor scraped against fallen girders as he wedged himself beside her. The chitinous plates on his torso flexed, taking the weight as he braced. His clawed arm, thickened with 3 bony spikes, dug into the concrete slab, fingers sinking deep. With a roar that was more monster than man, he heaved. Muscles corded, tendons straining, and the slab lifted just enough. Mara dragged herself free, her injured leg leaving a smear of blood on the dust-choked floor. No sooner had she cleared the wreckage than the Titan struck. Tendrils, thick as tree trunks and glistening with bioluminescent slime, shot from its underbelly. They wrapped around Leo's waist, his wings, pinning his arms to his sides. Another snaked toward Mara, but she rolled aside, firing a sidearm she'd scavenged, rounds pinging harmlessly off the creature's armored hide. The Titan's maw yawned open, a cavern lined with rows of needle-like teeth, and a guttural vibration shook the chamber. It was pulling them in, the suction tugging at Leo's leathery wings, drawing them toward that acid-filled gullet. Leo's thermal vision flared. Amid the riot of heat signatures, the Titan's boiling core, Mara's fading warmth, the ambient glow of ruptured conduits, one spot burned with a purity that made his insatiable gut clench with hunger. Deep within the creature's chest, behind layers of pulsating muscle and chitin, a heart organ glowed with a steady, brilliant white. The pure heart. It pulsed rhythmically, each beat sending waves of bioenergy through the Titan's form, fueling its regeneration. Mara shouted something, but her words were lost in the roar of the Titan's breath. Leo's mind raced. Direct assault was futile, the exterior armor was too thick, and the creature would regenerate faster than he could carve through. But the interior. His gaze fixed on the maw, the path of least resistance. A suicidal gamble, yet his dwindling humanity left little room for fear. He had wings, scales, venom, and nothing left to lose but memories he could no longer recall. With a wrench that tore one of the tendrils free, Leo activated his wings. They snapped open, leathery membranes straining against the grip of the others. He didn't fight the suction, he embraced it. Tucking his limbs close, he let the Titan's pull yank him forward, a projectile aimed straight into its throat. Mara's cry of alarm was the last human sound he heard before the world narrowed to darkness and heat. The interior was a nightmare of flesh and fluid. Acidic digestive juices splashed against his dragon scales, hissing but failing to penetrate. His thermal vision adjusted, painting the tunnel in vivid detail, muscular walls contracting to crush him, branching passages leading to stomach sacs, and ahead, the steady white glow of the heart. Leo's clawed arm lashed out, tearing through spongy tissue. His four prehensile tendrils from his back extended, anchoring him against the peristaltic waves trying to force him deeper. He crawled forward, a parasite in reverse, each movement a battle against pressure and corrosion. The heart chamber was a cavern of its own, ribbed with crystalline structures that pulsed with light. The pure heart hung suspended by thick vascular cords, larger than his torso, its surface smooth and opalescent. It beat with a sound like a deep drum, each drum resonating through Leo's bones. His insatiable gut roared with need, a primal urge that overrode all else. He didn't hesitate. His claws sheared through the cords, and the heart dropped into his arms, surprisingly light for its size. He didn't need to eat it all, the database had said a fragment would suffice for the cure. But his cheat demanded consumption. He tore a chunk free, the material yielding like firm fruit, and shoved it into his mouth. It tasted of ozone and iron, flooding his system with a wave of pure, stabilizing energy. His mutations, the scales, the wings, the venom, all hummed in harmony, their usual chaotic edge smoothed temporarily. But the cost came swift and brutal. A memory surfaced, then shattered. His sister's face, a blur of smiles and shared secrets in a world before the rift, dissolved into nothingness. Not just the memory of her features, but the emotion tied to it, love, protective instinct, the ache of loss. It vanished, leaving a void so profound that Leo staggered, the heart fragment almost slipping from his grasp. Where there had been an anchor to his humanity, now there was only hollow efficiency. He felt nothing for the ghost he'd just erased. The Titan shuddered around him. Without its heart, the bioenergy sustaining it failed. The muscular walls spasmed, then went slack. Acid flows ceased. Leo clutched the remaining heart fragment and fought his way back, clawing through dead tissue toward the fading light of the maw. He emerged covered in gore, the Titan's corpse collapsing behind him in a heap of inert biomass. Mara limped toward him, her face pale with pain and relief. "You're alive," she breathed, then her eyes fell on the heart fragment. "Is that?" Leo nodded, his voice flat. "The pure heart. We have what we need." He retrieved the data drive from his pack, the cure formula now within reach. But as he turned, the lab around them began to tremble. Alarms blared, not the shrill warnings of before, but a deeper, system-wide alert. Panels on the walls lit up with countdown sequences, self-destruct initiated. The Titan's death had triggered a failsafe. From the corridors above, skittering sounds multiplied. Bio-horrors, smaller, faster variants drawn by the disturbance, poured from vents and shattered doorways. Their forms were a blur of claws and teeth, a swarm descending toward the chamber. The rift outside, visible through cracked viewports, pulsed with malignant energy, disgorging more creatures into the overrun facility. Leo's enhanced tracking senses mapped the threats, dozens, converging. His thermal vision showed heat signatures flooding the upper levels. The exit route was being cut off. He hefted the heart fragment, its glow reflecting in his eyes, now devoid of the warmth that might have once mirrored Mara's concern. "We run," he said, the words empty of urgency, just fact. "Or we die here." The lab groaned, ceiling supports buckling. Mara gripped his arm, her touch a faint echo of a connection he could no longer fully feel. Together, they faced the swarm, the cure in hand and the last of Leo's humanity buried in the void where his sister's face had been. The ground heaved beneath them, a final convulsion of the dying lab. Leo felt the tremors through his dragon-scale boots, another memory fragment dissolving into the void where his sister's face had been just hours before. He didn't remember her name anymore, only the hollow ache where affection should have been. Mara stumbled against a shuddering wall, her injured leg buckling. "The tunnels are collapsing," she shouted over the groaning metal and cracking concrete. Leo's enhanced thermal vision painted the corridor in gradients of red and orange. Behind them, a wave of heat signatures swarmed, dozens of bio-horrors drawn by the Titan's death throes. Their shrieks echoed through the narrowing passage, a chorus of hunger and rage. To his left, structural supports groaned under stress, their heat signatures flickering toward critical failure. He grabbed Mara's arm with his clawed hand, the 3 bony spikes along its back scraping against her makeshift armor. "This way," he said, his voice flat. The words felt mechanical, like reciting instructions from a manual he'd half forgotten. They ran, or rather, Leo dragged Mara while she limped alongside him. His leathery wings twitched against his back, aching to unfurl, but the tunnel ceiling hung too low. Debris rained down, chunks of concrete and twisted rebar. Leo raised his scaled arm, letting the dragon-like plates take the impact. The blows rattled through his bones, but the armor held, shedding dust and fragments. A section of ceiling ahead collapsed completely, blocking their path with a mountain of rubble. Mara gasped, her breath coming in ragged pants. "We're trapped." Leo's mind worked with cold efficiency. Thermal vision showed a gap near the top where heat escaped, a narrow opening to the next corridor. His wings could carry him through easily. But Mara couldn't fly. He remembered saving her from the debris in the Titan's chamber. The memory was there, factual and precise. He had lifted rubble, pulled her free, assessed her injuries. But the why of it had evaporated. Why had he chosen to save her instead of securing the pure heart immediately? Tactically, it made no sense. The heart was the objective. Her survival was secondary. Yet here he was, about to make the same illogical choice again. "Hold on," he said, his tone devoid of urgency. Before she could protest, he wrapped his 4 prehensile tendrils around her torso, their barbed tips careful not to pierce her clothing. His wings snapped open, leathery membranes stretching to their full span. They scraped against the tunnel walls, shedding flakes of ancient paint and mold. With a powerful downstroke, he launched them both upward, tendrils keeping Mara secured against his chest. They squeezed through the gap, his scales scraping against jagged concrete. Mara cried out as a protruding rebar caught her shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. Leo felt the impact through the tendrils, registered the injury, calculated the blood loss as minimal. He adjusted their trajectory slightly, his wings beating hard against the dust-choked air. They landed in the next corridor just as the original tunnel behind them collapsed completely. The roar of falling structure drowned out the pursuing bio-horror's shrieks, temporarily. Mara slumped against a wall, clutching her bleeding shoulder. "Thanks," she breathed, her eyes searching his face. You're still in there, right?" Leo tilted his head. "In where?" The question seemed to pain her more than the wound. She looked away, toward the distant glow of emergency lights. "Never mind. Which way now?" His thermal vision showed the pursuing heat signatures already finding new paths through the rubble. They were adapting, spreading out. To the right, the corridor sloped upward, toward surface access shafts marked on the lab schematics he'd memorized before the memories of studying them began to fade. To the left, a cooler zone suggested storage chambers, possibly with alternative exits. Right, he decided. Upward. They moved faster now, Mara pushing through the pain. Leo's advanced tracking senses picked up the scent of ozone and decay, the vibrations of more collapses deeper in the complex. His retractable stingers itched in his wrists, the paralytic venom glands full and ready. He resisted the urge to use them on every shadow that moved. Each mutation activation drained him, and he needed to conserve energy for whatever waited above. A pack of smaller bio-horrors, dog-sized creatures with too many legs and lamprey mouths, burst from a side passage. Mara raised her weapon, a makeshift spear with a sharpened rebar tip, but Leo was already moving. His clawed arm swept out, catching the lead creature mid-leap. Bony spikes punched through chitin, and he flung the twitching body into its companions. Two more lunged. His stingers shot forward, needle-thin projectiles that embedded in their sensory clusters. The creatures convulsed, paralyzed mid-attack, collapsing into twitching heaps. He didn't eat them. The thought barely registered, just another tactical consideration. Eating their parts might grant useful traits for navigating the collapsing lab. But it would also cost more memories. He'd already lost Joy, his birthday, his sister's face. What remained? His name. The concept of humanity. The cure formula stored in his pack alongside the pure heart fragment. Better to fight with what he had. They reached a vertical shaft, a maintenance tunnel leading upward. Rusted ladder rungs climbed into darkness. Mara stared up, her face pale. I can't climb with this leg. Leo's wings unfurled again. I'll carry you. The shaft's too narrow for both of us flying, she pointed out. He calculated. The shaft diameter was approximately 2 meters. His wingspan was 3 meters fully extended. But he didn't need full extension for lift, just enough to reduce their weight on the ladder. Partial deployment, he said, as if explaining to himself. You climb. I'll provide lift. He wrapped 2 tendrils around her waist, the other 2 gripping ladder rungs above. His wings beat in short, controlled bursts, each downstroke lifting them both several rungs higher. Mara scrambled, her good leg pushing, her hands gripping rusted metal. Flakes of corrosion rained down, stinging their eyes. Below, the bio-horrors reached the shaft entrance. They piled into the opening, clawing at the walls, but unable to climb effectively. One attempted to leap upward, its many legs scrabbling for purchase. Leo's free claw lashed out, severing limbs. The creature fell back into the seething mass. They climbed for what felt like hours. Leo's muscles burned, the minor regeneration mutation working overtime to repair micro-tears in his tissue. His breath came steady, mechanical. He monitored Mara's vital signs through the tendrils, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, pain spikes with each movement. Survivable. For now. A sliver of gray light appeared above. Surface air, cold and sharp, filtered down, carrying the scent of rain and ruin. Almost there, Mara gasped. The final 10 meters were the hardest. The ladder ended at a collapsed section where concrete had slumped inward, blocking the exit. Only a narrow gap remained, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Leo released Mara, letting her cling to the ladder. He examined the blockage with thermal vision. The concrete was cooling rapidly, the lab's internal heat fading as systems failed. But the structural integrity was questionable. One wrong move could bring the whole shaft down on them. His claws dug into the concrete, testing. The dragon-scale armor on his hands held against the abrasion. He began tearing, methodically, piece by piece. Chunks of rubble fell past them, bouncing down the shaft into the darkness below. The bio-horrors shrieked as debris struck them. As he worked, a memory surfaced, not a full recollection, but a sensation. The feel of sunlight on his face. Warmth. He couldn't place when or where, but the ghost of it lingered. Then it was gone, washed away by the cold efficiency of his task. The gap widened. Mara squeezed through first, wincing as her injured leg scraped against rough edges. Leo followed, his wings folding tightly against his back to fit. They emerged into a ruined courtyard. The purification lab's above-ground structures lay in heaps of shattered glass and twisted steel. The sky overhead was the color of bruised flesh, twilight settling over the bio-horror apocalypse. In the distance, the dimensional rift pulsed with sickly energy, a wound in reality that never healed. Behind them, the ground shuddered. A deep, final groan echoed from below, followed by a sound like a giant sigh. The lab imploded, collapsing in on itself. Dust plumed from ventilation shafts, then settled into an eerie quiet. Mara sank to her knees, breathing hard. We made it. Leo stood motionless, scanning the surroundings. His thermal vision picked up residual heat from the collapse, but no immediate threats. The pure heart fragment in his pack felt heavy, a tangible weight alongside the data drive containing the cure formula. He looked at Mara. She was smiling weakly, relief etched into her dirt-streaked face. He recognized the expression, understood it intellectually as an indicator of positive emotional state. But he felt nothing in response. No shared relief. No camaraderie. She was an asset who had provided tactical support during the lab infiltration. Her continued survival increased the probability of successful cure delivery to the survivor enclave by approximately 37%. Why had that mattered before? He couldn't recall. "We should move," he said. "The collapse will attract scavengers." "Give me a minute," Mara pleaded, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. "I just need to." Her words cut off as figures emerged from the surrounding ruins. 6 of them, moving with practiced silence. They wore tattered robes stitched with symbols that hurt Leo's eyes to look at, the same markings he'd seen on the cultists who had captured him before. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, but their hands held weapons, jagged blades forged from monster bones, and one carried a rifle with bioluminescent cartridges. The leader stepped forward, pushing back his hood. His face was gaunt, one eye milky white, the other burning with fanatical intensity. Scales dotted his neck, minor mutations, poorly integrated. A cultist, not fully transformed but devout enough to wear his corruption proudly. "The heart," the man rasped. "You have the pure heart. The sacrament demands it." Leo's inventory of skills and mutations ran through his mind. Wings, fatigued but functional. Stingers, 3 doses of venom remaining. Claws, sharp. Scales, intact. Tendrils, responsive. Thermal vision showed 5 more heat signatures flanking them, moving into position. 11 total. Mara struggled to her feet, raising her spear. "Back off." The cultist leader smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "The monster gives orders." How quaint. His gaze shifted to Leo. "You're more beast than man now. We can smell it. Join us. Worship the rift. Embrace what you're becoming." Leo's hand went to the pack containing the heart. The cure. The reason for all of this. The last thread connecting him to something. He couldn't remember what. But he knew, with the last fading echo of whatever he'd once been, that he couldn't let them have it. His wings snapped open, scattering dust and debris. His stingers extended with soft clicks. The cultists raised their weapons, their fanatical eyes gleaming in the twilight. One more fight. With whatever humanity he had left. The ruins lay silent under a bruised sky, the air thick with the scent of ozone and decay. Leo stood motionless, his dragon-scale armor gleaming dully in the fading light, the pure heart fragment clutched in one clawed hand. Mara crouched beside him, her breath ragged as she held the cured data close to her chest. 11 cultists surrounded them, their forms a blur of ragged robes and mutated flesh, led by the gaunt fanatic with one milky eye and scales dotting his neck like a disease. "Give us the heart, abomination," the gaunt leader hissed, raising a bioblade that pulsed with a sickly green luminescence. The weapon was a twisted fusion of bone and sinew, dripping with acidic residue. Leo's thermal vision activated automatically, painting the scene in hues of red and orange. The cultists' heat signatures flared with fanatic intensity, their movements predictable, their weaknesses exposed. He felt nothing as he analyzed them, no fear, no anger, just a cold calculus of threat and response. The memory of his sister's face was gone, erased by the Titan's heart, leaving only a hollow ache where love once resided. Mara shifted, her injured leg trembling. "Leo, we can't let them have it," she whispered, her voice strained with pain. He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the leader. The cultists advanced, their footsteps crunching on broken concrete. The gaunt one lunged first, the bioblade slicing through the air toward Leo's throat. Without hesitation, Leo's wings snapped open, leathery membranes catching the stale breeze as he dodged with inhuman grace. His clawed arm shot out, 3 bony spikes glinting as they parried the blade, sending sparks flying. The impact jarred through his scales, but he felt no pain, only a distant recognition of pressure. He moved like a machine, each action precise and efficient. His thermal vision highlighted the cultists' joints and arteries, their movements slowed by his enhanced tracking senses. As 2 cultists charged from the left, Leo's 4 prehensile tendrils lashed out from his back, wrapping around their wrists and yanking them off balance. They stumbled, their weapons clattering to the ground. He didn't kill them, instead, his retractable stingers emerged from his wrists, injecting paralytic venom with quick, clinical strikes. The cultists collapsed, twitching but alive, a faint echo of a morality he could no longer name, a ghost of the man who once hesitated to harm others. Mara defended the cured data with a scavenged pipe, swinging it at a cultist who tried to flank her. The clash of metal against flesh echoed in the ruins. Leo saw her struggle, her heat signature flickering with exhaustion. He calculated the risk: if she fell, the data might be lost. His wings beat once, lifting him over the fray as he descended behind 3 cultists closing in on her. His claws raked across their backs, tearing through robes but avoiding fatal wounds. They cried out, stumbling away as he landed between them and Mara, his scales absorbing a glancing blow from a cultist's club. The gaunt leader screamed in frustration, his milky eye rolling wildly. "You are a monster, just like the ones we worship. Join us, and embrace your true nature." Leo ignored the words, their meaning lost in the void of his emotions. He focused on the leader's bioblade, its heat signature concentrated at the hilt. With a burst of speed from his minor regeneration mutation, he closed the distance, his clawed arm slamming into the leader's wrist. The bone cracked, and the blade fell, its green glow sputtering out. Leo's stingers injected venom into the leader's neck, and the gaunt man collapsed, his scales paling as paralysis set in. The remaining cultists faltered, their fanaticism wavering in the face of Leo's relentless efficiency. He didn't pursue them, instead, he turned to Mara, his thermal vision scanning the area for threats. "We need to go," he said, his voice flat and devoid of inflection. Mara nodded, limping as she gathered the data. They moved through the ruins, Leo's wings occasionally lifting them over collapsed structures, his dragon-scale armor shielding against falling debris. The cultists did not follow, their resolve broken by the hollow victory. After an hour of silent travel, they reached a relatively safe zone, a crumbling warehouse with intact walls, its interior littered with old crates and dust. The distant roars from the rift echoed like thunder, promising greater horrors, but here, there was a temporary respite. Mara sank onto a crate, her breath easing as she examined the cure formula on the data pad. "It requires precise alchemy," she murmured, her eyes scanning the instructions. "We need a sterile environment, specific reagents, but we have the pure heart. We can do this, Leo." Leo stood by a broken mirror leaning against a wall, its surface cracked and grimy. He looked at his reflection, and for a moment, he didn't recognize the creature staring back. His body was a patchwork of monstrous traits, dragon-like scales interwoven with chitinous plates, leathery wings folded against his back, clawed arms with bony spikes, and tendrils coiled like serpents. His eyes, once human, now glowed with a faint thermal hue, showing no spark of recognition, no trace of the starving scavenger who had eaten a dragon's heart to survive. The emotional erosion was complete, he felt nothing as he gazed upon his form, not disgust, not pride, just a cold emptiness. Mara looked up, a smile touching her lips. "We survived, Leo. We have the cure. You can be human again." Her words hung in the air, meaningless to him. He turned from the mirror, the pure heart fragment still in his hand, its pulsating warmth a stark contrast to his inner void. Distant roars grew louder, vibrations shaking the ground, but he paid them no mind. Instead, he whispered, the sound barely audible, "Who am I?" The question echoed in the silence, unanswered, as the cure lay within reach, and his humanity hung by the thinnest of threads, frayed beyond repair.